Section 0 of Shadow Forms, a collection of occult stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. Introduction. In an erratic moment, we conceived the notion of attempting to portray certain great occult truths through the medium of fiction. We believe many people will read stories who would never consider a philosophic dissertation on the subject. For that reason, we have gathered together a number of incidents in no way related, except by the common denominator of fantasy. While engaged in more serious literary pursuits, a number of vagrant thoughts interjected themselves, and from time to time were jotted down. Some of these were published monthly, but the periodicals in which they appeared have long been exhausted. These have been collected, and to them has been added other material not previously printed. One cannot sojourn for long in the Far East without hearing strange stories, all of them vouched for by the natives. Most of these would make one's blood run cold, but they are irresistibly fascinating to many people. Shadow Forms is a collection of weird and uncanny tales, based upon Oriental mystery, magic, and sorcery. Some of the stories are based on mythology and folklore, while here and there will be found one raised from the shaky foundation of superstition and hearsay. All of them have a message. The spirit of the snows is an old Japanese myth. The torture that was inflicted upon Hatpin Jake in the story of Silver Souls is based on early systems of punishment, used both in the Orient and in Europe during the Middle Ages. The witch doctor is vouched for by a young African boy whose father fought with the natives in the battle during which the white troops were routed by the magic and sorcery of Gomo. No claim is made as to historical accuracy, nor is it claimed that any of the stories are reasonable or logical. To certain types of minds they are both. To other types, neither. But more and more, our world is realizing that it is dangerous to say, this is so, or this is not so. The absurdities of yesterday are the facts of today. Very truly yours, Manly P. Hall, Los Angeles, August 20th, 1925. End of introduction. Section 1 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. Black Hat Sorcery. On the side of a rocky spur stood the rambling monastery. Notwithstanding its prominent position, few travelers had ever seen it or even heard the weird stories circulated by the natives concerning it. While the rocky cliff to which the gray, plastered buildings clung was over 2 miles above sea level, towering mountains on all sides gave to the casual observer the impression that the old lamasery lay in the depths of a valley. Tibet is a great plateau surrounded by the snow-covered Himalayas. It is a land of mystery, one of the last to preserve its primitive customs and to refuse admission to travelers and explorers. Its religion was originally demon worship. With the coming of Buddhism, a day of greater enlightenment dawned for its wild inhabitants. Gradually, however, the demons of primitive days crept into the new theology, until the simple Buddhistic monotheism of India gave place to a complicated religious faith containing more than 80,000 gods. The monastery which we have described was the last to maintain in purity the demonistic faiths of ancient Tibet. It belonged to the peculiar sect known as the Black Hat Lamas. Their abbot lived alone in a great castle-like building, with slanting walls which were pierced by dozens of windows. He was a wise but sinister individual, deeply versed in the magic and sorcery of his cult. The priests dwelt in the less pretentious structures below. They spent their days in prayer and meditation, or in gathering scant revenue for the upkeep of the temple from the native villages on the plains about the lamasery. The most important building in the group on the side of the rocky crag was the great temple to Yama, the lord of the demons, a deity brought from India and blended with the native Tibetan devils. A life-sized wooden statue of this deity stood in an ancient shrine surrounded by statues of lesser divinities. Those who came to worship recognized in this particular idol a great oracle, for they did not know that the voice which spoke to them through its leering mouth was the voice of a priest concealed within the secret compartment in the back of the figure. The temple was reputed by the natives to be of immense wealth. The entire treasure of the Black Hat Lamas was said to have been brought there when the religion vanished from Tibetan life. Gold and jewels beyond conception were rumored to be buried in secret chambers beneath the temple. None save the slant-eyed old abbot knew how to reach these treasures, or what their true magnitude was. In a curio shop in Kyoto, the Japanese antique dealer was explaining to a prospective customer a peculiar skull bowl which he held in his hand. "Yes, most honorable sir," he affirmed. "That is a genuine Tibetan piece, very rare. It is like finding it that you should pay only 250 yen. It is made of one human skull, a very perfect specimen. The native from whom my agent bought it said that it had come from the Black Hat Lamasery, just south of Lhasa." The customer, R.L. Richardson, showed intense interest. Though he had traveled widely, gathering specimens for a large English curio house specializing in Oriental antiquities, this was the first time he had heard of the strange sect. He purchased the skull bowl, and through judicious questioning learned all the dealer could tell him of the primitive religious practices and of the secret temple of the demon worshippers. Richardson was a man of action. He made up his mind immediately to go personally in search of the treasures of the mysterious Black Hat Temple. The Japanese warned him to give up this foolhardy project, but being of an adventurous turn of mind, Richardson set out at once for Darjeeling, where he prepared an expedition and quietly rode into the hills with pack train and 3 or 4 ferocious-looking Tibetan guides, only one of whom spoke English. 5 weeks later, the expedition wound out from among the hills, and just as evening was falling, reached the edge of the plain, near the center of which rose the high ridge surmounted by the gray plastered buildings. "There the place," announced the guide who spoke a little English. "Me never hear of him before myself, but I ask many natives. They tell me here, there, other place, but I figure out. I very bright man. I want extra pay. But master, look out. Black Hat Lama, no like white man. Kill him quick. Eat him up, maybe. Me don't know. You better go home." The adventurer had other plans, however, and halting his pack train, he made camp behind a little spur of hills some 5 miles from the monastery. Commanding his native assistants to remain there until they received orders from him, Richardson started out alone, but armed to the teeth, for the lonely and deserted-looking temple group. It was already dark when he reached the foot of the jagged spur. A few lights glowed from the square windows of the lamasery. Avoiding the beaten path lest he should encounter the priests, Richardson climbed the almost sheer wall. He would never have succeeded but for his South African experiences in the British Army. Reaching the first group of buildings, he carefully skirted the houses of the priests and continued upward toward the great citadel that crowned the promontory. There was no other means of reaching it than the broad flights of stone steps, so keeping as close as he could to the dilapidated plastered walls, he crept upward. A chant was borne to his ears by the evening breezes, and a little later the dull boom of a temple gong sounded. Suddenly a black shadow separated itself from a wall nearby. Richardson quickly drew a revolver and held it in readiness for instant action. The form was that of a priest robed in flowing garments of black and wearing upon his head a broad-brimmed black hat, the crown of which formed a miniature Dagobah-shaped tower. This figure passed like a ghost down the stairs, the flowing robes brushing the point of Richardson's revolver as he crouched behind an angle of the adobe wall. Waiting until he was certain the priest was out of hearing, the Englishman continued his way up the ancient steps and finally reached the gate of the great octagonal building which housed Yama with his 3 heads. A light was burning in the room of the Lord Abbot, and its rays streaked the courtyard. The temple door was not locked or even closed, and silently as a shadow Richardson passed through the portal and stood in a spacious musty chamber. From the ceilings hung Tibetan temple curtains and pendants, mouldy with age, which swayed dismally in a slight draught. The air was heavy with incense, and here and there a red glowing coal showed where great joss sticks and tapers were burning. The floor under his feet was damp and cold. Around him massive pillars rose draped with rotting embroidery. All these things Richardson noted by the aid of a pocket flashlight, which he turned guardedly first in one direction, and then another. He realized that he was taking his life in his hands, but the adventurous ex-soldier was happy only when in danger. This evening promised him exceptional happiness. Before him loomed another doorway, smaller than the first, which apparently led to an inner chamber. Picking his way among the boxes of books and temple paraphernalia, Richardson approached the swaying curtain painted with saints and demons that closed the second doorway. Drawing it aside, he peered into the chamber beyond. It was dimly lighted by a single large candle upon a stand in the center of the earthen floor. The walls were hung with paintings of saints. Many lacquered pillars upheld the beamed ceiling. The floor was richly covered with ancient rugs. An enormous incenser stood before him, and opposite, a gilded gate led into a great alcove. Through the carvings of this gate Richardson could faintly discern the jeweled and gold-crested shrine. Never before had he seen so many shadows. The flickering candle flame caused 100 weird reflections. The slowly swinging draperies formed the figures of strange demons on the walls, while the draft blowing through the chambers caused an endless swishing sound. Here and there a tattered ornament flapped dismally. The rafters were grayed with smoke. An oppressive gloom was everywhere. Richardson shivered and, still clenching the revolver, passed swiftly over to the gilded gate. Opening this, he entered the sanctuary. On a lotus dais, surrounded by lesser gods and goddesses, stood the leering Yama. His 3 faces, terrible in expression, glowered at the intruder. The heart of the antiquarian beat for sheer joy. The room was a mass of priceless religious curios, skull bowls with emeralds and rubies inlaid in the rough Tibetan gold, thunderbolts with diamond rays, rosaries of precious stones, enshrined jeweled figures, marvelous tapestries, curious paintings. All these confronted Richardson. He deliberated as to just what he should appropriate. Space was the essence of the contract, and only portable objects could be considered. He studied carefully. The smallest and most precious he would take. A little Buddha cut out of jade with emerald eyes and a magnificent diamond in the forehead met with his approval. Picking up the little figure, he slipped it into his pocket. He then gazed up at the gilded Yama. A splendid necklace of matched pearls which adorned the lacquered throat of the god attracted his professional eye. Casting around for a means of reaching the necklace, he discovered a small flight of steps leading up behind the lotus dais. Mounting these steps, he found himself directly behind the many-armed statue of the Lord Demon. Then, for the first time, he noticed that it was hollow. He stepped for a second into the opening in the back of the figure, and found that he could look out with ease through the god's eyeless sockets. The mouth of the god was carved out inside, not unlike a megaphone, but Richardson did not know about the supposed oracular powers of the deity, nor did he realize that the place where he was standing was the place often occupied by the Lord Lama. With his penknife he lifted 2 small wooden pegs which held the necklace of the god in place, and a moment later the string of pearls reposed next to the Buddha in his jacket pocket. Returning to his position at the front of the sanctuary, Richardson gave one last look around and finally decided to complete his collection by taking the jeweled thunderbolt which rested on the altar. With this in his hip pocket, and a very satisfied feeling in his heart, he decided to depart. 1,000 things he wanted, but he was wise enough to realize that a heavy load might cost him his life. He passed out of the sanctuary through the grated door and stood again in the room of fantastic shadows. The eerie stillness of the place oppressed him. He crept across the floor past the huge candle in its bronze holder, and then, in spite of his constantly growing desire to leave behind that awful place, he paused and gazed round. A faint, nondescript sound reached his ears. His hair stood on end as his eyes noted the swaying shadows which the dim light cast into every corner and recess. Suddenly he realized that the shadows were alive. He laughed under his breath. It must be his imagination. There was no one there. Then he looked again. This time there was no mistaking. Only one thing could cast that kind of a shadow. He could distinguish a broad-brimmed black hat with a strange gilded tassel. It was moving slowly towards him. He looked past the incense burner to the door through which he had just come, and shrank back in terror. Another black hat with its silken tassels was faintly visible, almost as a shadow. Each way he turned he saw these hats. His retreat was cut off. Quickly turning, he bounded to the grated door leading to the inner sanctuary, and passing through, closed it behind him. His previous search had convinced him that there was no way in or out of this room. Standing behind the lattice, he watched the shadows. Suddenly the light glinted on steel. This was no illusion. One of the spectral figures bore in its upraised hand a long, sharp knife. There was a whistling sound. Richardson instinctively ducked his head, which saved his life. A thin steel knife passed through the gratings where his face had been, and, striking a bronze bowl, fell clattering at his feet. Richardson aimed his revolver at first one of the shadows, and then another, but they were so indistinct that he realized it was useless to shoot. Taking his flashlight from his pocket, he pointed it at one of the dark corners. A stream of light cut the darkness and revealed a tall, slender figure, draped from head to foot in sable garments. Over its head the figure wore a grinning papier-mâché mask, of which the broad-brimmed black hat was a part. As the light struck the form, it melted away into the draperies of the wall. At the same instant, a shout arose, and shadowy forms armed with gleaming blades advanced from all directions toward the gilded gate of the shrine. Richardson's revolver spat fire, and groans were added to the shouting. Two of the figures pitched forward upon the ground. A second later, the room was empty. The black-hatted priests had dissolved. Hour after hour, Richardson watched. Nothing appeared. He dare not leave his retreat. Once he opened the grating a few inches. As he did so, he heard a soft rustling, and focusing his light in the direction whence it came, he observed that the wall curtains were swaying in a manner not caused by the wind. Dawn came. Weary with his vigil, Richardson sat on a small teak stand from which he had removed the incense burner. The sun's rays did not penetrate the gloomy interior of the building. A dim twilight alone showed that it was day without. By its aid, Richardson studied the room and also made a careful investigation of the chamber he himself was in. The adventurer was not a pessimist, but he realized that, in all probability, the present enterprise would be his last. There was no way out save through that hall with its swaying curtains, and he knew that before he could hope to cross it, 20 knives would be buried in his back. The bodies of the 2 llamas were gone. Who had taken them he did not know. Suddenly, as he studied the walls and ceiling through the narrow gratings of the door, he felt the earth moving under his feet. The tightly packed dirt bulged upward slightly. Quickly, Richardson jumped back, seeking an escape. There was no place to hide. The inner sanctuary was without adornment other than the great shrine. Then an idea came to him. The best place to take his last stand was within the hollowed-out body of Yama. Quickly, dropping a curtain used for the purpose over the gilded door, so that the llamas without could not see his movements, Richardson climbed the steps which led up to the figure of the god of evil and took up his place of refuge within the hollowed back of the great demon. Through the eye-holes he watched. The earthen floor before the shrine was moving upward. There must be a trap door a few inches under the surface, he concluded, probably leading to the treasure vaults under the temple. Gradually the floor raised. An opening appeared, revealing a long yellow hand holding up the trap door. A few seconds passed. A black-hatted figure emerged from the opening, and, climbing the steps, stood at the foot of the great statue. After it came another and another, until a dozen or more were gathered there. Richardson kept perfectly silent. The llamas began a search. They opened the grated doors and were joined by several others from the outer room. They talked excitedly, pointing up and down and into various corners, but none of them seemed to suspect the statue of Yama. Then one of them noticed that the god's necklace was gone. He pointed this out to the others. Immediately a howl arose, cries of rage. At the same moment the Lord Abbot arrived, an imposing figure gloriously gowned and wearing a number of rosaries. He muttered a few guttural words, and 4 of the priests, passing around behind the dais, began to climb up towards the great Yama, evidently searching for the necklace. Richardson cursed the hour he stole it, but repentance was of no avail. He turned in the cramped opening, and, as the head of the first priest with its black hat appeared, he fired a bullet between the eyes. A deafening uproar ensued. The priests, carrying the body of their companion, beat a hasty retreat and gathered in a group at the foot of the statue, where they stood nonplussed, gazing up at Yama's gilded form. The abbot pondered for a few moments, and then gave long and detailed instructions. The priests scurried away in several directions. About an hour later, 3 of them returned, 2 carrying a heavy table which they placed at the foot of the shrine. The third was bent under the weight of a long board, on which lay the figure of a human body roughly molded in dough. Footnote: the practice of offering human sacrifice was stopped by the Buddhists, who substituted figures made of bread dough for living victims. End footnote. It was made to represent a white man. This form he laid upon the table. Then all retired again. The day passed. Again the shades of evening enshrouded the temple in impenetrable gloom. A solitary candle brought by a priest shed its flickering light on the figure of dough. Richardson stepped out of the aperture and walked up and down on the dais to stretch his legs. The terrors of another night appalled him. He needed strength for the ordeal. Faint from loss of sleep and lack of food and water, he knew that a day or two at most separated him from annihilation. But with that tenacity with which all things cling to life, he resolved to continue his earthly existence as long as possible. His watch said 10 o'clock when again the shadows began to congregate. This time they were more fantastic than before. Out of the gloom trooped a strange pageantry of figures, with the heads of lions, of birds, and of demons. Great dragons came, wild beasts of the jungle, crawling serpents, gigantic birds, bulls with horns 6 or 7 feet long, a motley group swaying, chanting with weird and uncanny rhythm. Suddenly from the midst of the group emerged the abbot, robed in magnificent costume and wearing the domed black hat with its silken tassels. In one hand he carried a thunderbolt, and in the other a long staff ending in a keen, wicked-looking blade. He raised his face towards the great Yama and spoke in broken English. "White man, you come to rob our temple. You steal necklace of Yama. You try find temple treasure. We no hurt you. You rob us. You kill my priests. You must die. I give you choice. Take your devil stick, gun, and kill yourself, or else we shall kill you. You cannot escape. If you shoot a dozen of us, the rest will kill you. If we want, we can starve you to death. You best kill yourself." Richardson laughed mirthlessly. Pointing his revolver through the leering mouth of Yama, he fired at the high priest. The aged man tottered, and the thunderbolt dropped from his hand. The bullet had gone through his shoulder. 2 figures advanced to support him, but with his uninjured hand he waved them back. Coming forward, surrounded by the weird creatures of the temple, the high priest stood before the figure made of dough. An attendant brought him a sharp knife. Raising his eyes towards the face of Yama, the Lama began an ominous chant. Ever higher rose his voice, his words punctuated by the clang of the temple gong and the reverberation of the huge bronze bell. Inhuman howls and cries came from the masked figures about him. Richardson grew dizzy. The walls seemed to sway about him. With an effort he steadied himself, muttering, "This lack of food and sleep is too much for me." At last the chant of the Lama ended in a shrill, wailing cry like the death note of a dying eagle. Silence followed, so dead, so absolute, that it could almost be heard. The aged Lama raised his head and spoke to the hidden white man. "You have not killed yourself. Therefore now you die. You die by magic, the magic of the Lamas. You cannot fight it, for you do not know the power of Black Hat Sorcery." Leaning over, the old Lama with his sharp knife cut through one of the arms of the dough figure. Picking up the dissevered member, he threw it on the ground. From the cleft extremities there poured out red liquid resembling blood. A groan of pain sounded from within the lacquered figure of Yama. The priest then cut off the other arm, then the 2 feet. With a single stroke of the sharp knife, he disemboweled the form. Lastly, he completely severed the head. As he did so, the moans and cries of anguish from within the god ceased, and the hollow wooden form tipped forward from its pedestal. Striking the altarpiece, it turned over and fell with a splintering crash directly in the center of the table. Breaking through this, the great idol fell smashed into a dozen parts to the ground. The old Lama stood swaying back and forth, supported by his staff, and gazed down at the form of Richardson. The body was cut and mutilated in the same way as was the figure of dough. End of section 1. Section 2 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Witch Doctor. Through the jungle ran a narrow path, just a single foot trail bordered on each side by great ferns with broad swaying leaves, from whose clustered groups rose the round shaggy-barked trunks of lofty palm trees whose green fronds quivered in the gentle breeze. The sunlight never penetrated to the footpath or dried the moist earth from which rose that moldy smell which is always found where the light of day is excluded. Great streamers of moss, dripping with a slimy ooze, hung swaying from the rotten branches of trees long dead, while here and there a great orchid hung blooming, saturating the atmosphere with a heavy, nauseating fragrance. It was an uncultivated and practically unknown area, stretching hundreds of miles until finally it reached the mountains whose snowy crests rise in strange contrast to the tropical valley below. The sounds were many, and as varied as the vegetation. The chattering of monkeys as they swung from tree to tree, or hung by their tails from the gigantic stalks of jungle fern, was ever in the air. Now and then, the cry of some gaily plumed bird sounded above the incessant clamor. Other voices there were, too, which blended into an endless symphony, and were audible only as a faint rumble, the roaring of lions, the crying and laughing of hyenas, or the shrill trumpeting of mighty elephants. All these awoke the echoes of the wilderness. Suddenly the swaying ferns along the narrow path parted, and into an open glade arched over with palm leaves strode Gomo, the medicine man, the much-feared and respected fetish doctor in all the glory of primitive power. Gomo was all of 6.5 feet tall, with a body perfect according to primitive standards. Great muscles and sinews like those of an ox showed through the ebony skin, giving an impression of power and majesty to the gigantic figure. Gomo wore around him the skin of a lion. Its shaggy mane covered his chest, while the long tail was twisted around his waist as a belt in which was stuck a curved knife of some flinty stone. His thick nose and lips were pierced with colored sticks of ivory, and in his ears hung pendants of crudely hammered metal. The hair was shaven from his head, or rather, we should say, scraped therefrom with the aid of sharp stones, all save a small spot at the top of the skull, where a tiny topknot still remained, bound tightly into a tassel by means of dyed and colored strips of fiber. His face and body were thickly smeared with horrible designs and colored clays, and in one hand he carried his medicine rattle, formed from the skull of an infant. He wore a necklace of human teeth, and his belt was decorated with strands of hair from the heads of his victims. On his left arm was a mighty shield of rhinoceros leather, and in the same hand he held a great club of seasoned wood, with a sharp stone lashed to the end. As Gomo stood in the half-light, surrounded by the oozing, decaying vegetation of the tropical jungle, he made a picture weird and barbaric. He stood like a statue, his ears with the fine sense of the primitive man, listening for the footsteps of an advancing host, a horde of white men who were coming to rob Gomo of his elephant tusks, of his skins and trophies, of his gold and diamonds, and most of all to take from him his power as invoker of spirits and messenger of the gods. For many days through the jungles his people had been retreating before the onrush of civilization, before implements of war which Gomo could not understand, before shining sticks of metal that spat out flame and death, before curved blades of steel that gleamed like silver in the sun. Before these strange implements of magic of the white man, Gomo seemed powerless. Hour by hour, the jungle that had been his home was torn from his grasp by the evil power of the white man. Not without cost to the invader, however, for from among the palm trees, amidst the swaying ferns and mounds of rock, tiny poisoned arrows flew, and little feathered darts, tipped with deadly venom, rained from the blowguns of the natives, scattering death and destruction in all directions. But still, with a power which the natives could not fathom, the white man continued to advance into the jungle. Suddenly, through the underbrush, dashed a black form. Staggering forward, he collapsed in a heap at the feet of the mighty medicine man. "Oh, exalted one!" groaned the form from the ground, whose clay-covered body was streaked with blood. "Oh, mighty worker of magic! Save your people, for they are powerless against the fetish of the white man. Even now the mighty chieftain, whose belt is made of the skulls of kings, lies dead in the jungle, struck down by the flaming magic of the white enemy. One by one our warriors sink down beside the way. Their charms and their incantations are as useless as their shields to protect them from this dread magic. O mighty one, if you do not help us now, there will be none to save. Our arrows fall short of the mark, and our stone hammers are powerless. You alone can save us, for you know the will of the gods." With a gurgling cry, the figure pitched forward, and, rolling over, lay face upward in the path. A bullet had entered his heart, but with the same power and courage which marks the beasts of the jungle, he had lived for many minutes, whereas a white man would have fallen in his tracks. Gomo gazed down for a moment at the huddled mass at his feet. He saw the mighty muscles of the warrior. He saw the look of fierce hate and determination which still animated the dead man's face, and he realized that the magic of the white man must be great when it could overpower such a one. Slowly, the great witch-doctor turned and retraced his steps along the path, and finally vanished amidst a great sunburst of palms and ferns that suddenly appeared ahead, and into which the trail dissolved. The hours passed, the shadows lengthened, and soon the howling cries of sunset sounded upon the air, which seemed even more vibrant, more mystical, more terrible, as that strange electrical twilight of the jungles shrouded the trees and ferns in ever-deepening gloom. Some 3 hours after sunset, in the clump of palms and ferns where the path ended, a dull glow arose which tinted the swaying trees and branches with copper hues. It was from a log fire built upon the top of a little mound. Before the fire, like some great gaunt ghost or demon from another world, stood Gomo the fetish doctor. Around him the strange utensils of his craft, skulls and human bones, tusks of elephants inscribed with strange and mystic characters, great drums, their heads stretched over with human skins, painted and tinted with weird figures. All these and many other articles, unnameable and indescribable, were brought into faint relief by the gleaming fire that the medicine man had built. Suddenly, the guttural voice broke into a weird chant, which sounded not unlike the howling of the wild beasts in the surrounding darkness. Raising his great arms, daubed with colored clays, above his head, and swinging the rattle in tune with his incantation, he poured forth a torrent of strange sounds. The surrounding trees and bushes seemed to shudder at the terrible outburst, their leafy heads tossing as though in a sudden breeze. Unto the gods of the sun, the moon, and the stars, the witch-doctor cried. Unto the spirits of the dead he sent forth his lamentations. Unto the creatures that dwell in the air, the spirits of the snows, the souls of beasts, plants, and flowers, he chanted his strange ritual. His eyes, outlined with great circles of white mud, gleamed with a fiery light as he beat upon his chest and trumpeted forth like some hairy anthropoid. If my people are themselves not strong enough to preserve that which is their own, and protect their homes from the hands of the foreign devils, let the spirits of nature combine with us. Let the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, the creatures of the ether, yes, even the rocks themselves, rise up with the children of nature against the black magic of the white man, cried Gomo in a voice that echoed and re-echoed through the jungle, and, picked up by the hills and valleys, was carried on and on, no one knows how far. As he stood there uttering his invocations to the elements and his imprecations against the despoilers of his people, a strange sound broke the stillness, a buzzing, droning sound, and out of the marshes and the swamps, out of the pools where the animals came to drink, and those fens where the dripping bushes were evergreen with the moisture of the fen, came hosts of tiny insects. There came the tsetse fly, which spreads the sleeping sickness, the malaria mosquito, and 1,000 other poisonous creatures, carrying with them the death of the jungle. In the weird flickering firelight they gleamed, their tiny wings translucent and of 1,000 rainbow hues. Swarm upon swarm they gathered, and then along the ground came creeping things, strange beetles with beaks and horns, insects and 1,000 legs, bony land crabs with death in their claws, a great, seething, struggling mass, pouring from every nook of the jungle, gathering ever closer and closer to the twisting, spinning, howling figure of the fetish doctor. At the foot of the mound upon which he stood they stopped, while the air around him became alive with tiny, singing, buzzing things. Suddenly the great Gomo, he who was robed in the skin of a lion, pointed his hand, gleaming dully with his golden ornaments, at the narrow path that wound through the jungle. "Along that trail," he roared in guttural accents, "along that trail come the destroyer of our people. We cannot fight their magic. They come to steal our land and our riches, because they are strong and we are weak, and because they have strange magic which we do not know. Our men can fight no longer, but the magic of the white men cannot withstand the magic of Gomo, the invoker of the crawling, singing, buzzing ones whose army no man can overpower." Into the fire he threw a handful of strange herbs, mixed with the powdered bones of captive kings. A great cloud of smoke arose, and, instead of dissolving, floated like a balloon over the fire and, slowly becoming less and less distinct, passed along the trail that led into the jungle. Around and about this cloud the insects gathered, and in a numberless host, which grew greater as the minutes passed, they swarmed like an army of avenging angels upon the camp of the white men. In a few seconds all was disorder there. The soldiers built great fires to drive the insects off, but nothing, it seemed, kept them away. Healthy men sickened and died in a few moments before the onslaught of this buzzing multitude. The tiny tsetse fly brought death that sword nor gun could not avert. The great jumping spider was surer in its aim than the weapons of the white man. In a few hours the camp broke, and a frightened army began its hasty retreat to the sea, surrounded by a frenzied swarm of flying creatures. Their dead they could not bury, but were forced to leave them where they fell, and the great company that started forth with the white man's magic of gun and sword returned just a broken handful of malaria-infected refugees. They had gone forth sane, but they returned insane, broken by the great magic of Gomo, the witch doctor. As the white men embarked upon their ships, the great clouds of insects dissolved as though they had never been, and all that was left of them were little groups that buzzed around the stagnant pools or boldly tortured the mighty beasts of the jungle. Gomo the witch doctor stood upon his rock, overlooking the great blue ocean, and watching the ships sail away upon their journey homeward. He had walked along the trail dotted with the white men's dead. He even picked up the metal tubes that blazed forth fire and death, but they no longer availed, for the hands that had used them were stilled. "Great was the magic of the white man," murmured Gomo, "with his sticks that belched forth flame, and his blades of silver. But greater still is Gomo." And he beat his chest. "Greater still is the magic of the fetish doctor. They fight with the things they have made. Gomo fights with the spirits of nature." End of section 2. Section 3 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Teapot of Mandarin Wong. The room was small, but its furnishings were in keeping with the estate of its owner. The walls were richly tapestried, and the subtle odor of the East pervaded the atmosphere. In the middle of this apartment, every drapery of which seemed to enfold Oriental mystery, stood a carved table of teak inlaid with mother of pearl in designs of beasts and birds. In the center of this table was a teapot of rare Chinese porcelain. It was an odd teapot, diamond-shaped, its long spout in the form of a bird's beak. The handle was of twisted rattan. From the air-hole in the lid, a thin stream of vapor was rising, and the soft aroma of streaming tea buds, the first picking of the great crop, filled the air. The only light came from a wonderful silken lantern, hung with tinkling bells and cut glass pendants, which sent a soft shaded glow over the table, leaving the corners of the room in gloom. At the table sat 3 Chinese, before each a tiny porcelain cup filled with the almost colorless tea of China's best. The first was a middle-aged man, the son of Mandarin Wong. He was inclined to be heavy in figure, and his long black coat stretched over a ponderous front. His slanty eyes were gazing at his cup of tea, and his long yellow fingers toyed with the carvings on the tabletop. His face was immobile, and no sound escaped his lips. The second was an older man of slender build with massive brow. His hands were folded in his lap, and the red tassel of his cap, which hung down in front, was aided by his abstracted manner in diverting attention from the snake-like glitter in his eyes. Once he lifted his hand and stroked his black mustache, the ends of which drooped over his mouth. The third member of the group was a man whose wizened features, leather-like skin, and light gray hair told that the years were heavy upon him. In one hand he held his cup of tea, while in the other was a long, thin Chinese pipe. For half an hour these 3 had sat together. No word had passed their lips, while cup after cup of tea alone proved that they were living men, and not statues of ancient wood. They had met for a very important duty. 2 of them had come that justice might fall upon the head of the third, who in the silence of the night had strangled with his cue Mandarin Wong, whose body lay upon a couch a few feet away. One of them had slain this princely Chinese, whose power in the Orient was without limit, whose estates were bordered only by the Great Wall itself, and whose grandsires lay buried beneath the stupendous tomb of the Ming emperors. Mandarin Wong was the last of a mighty line, and now he had climbed to the celestial lands upon the cues of his ancestors, while these 3 sat in silent vigil, that the justice of China might be fulfilled. No word passed their lips, no sound broke the stillness, but slowly they sipped their tea, each knowing in his soul that one of them was a murderer. The oldest of the three leaned over and poured another cup. Even this motion seemed to startle the other two, for they moved slightly and seemed to waken as from sleep. Silence again descended as these three strange figures remained silhouetted against the surrounding gloom by the pale yellow light from the swaying lantern. Suddenly the stillness was broken by a soft footfall. There was a slight squeaking sound, then a miracle. From his couch of death, buried beneath a wealth of Chinese silk, rose Mandarin Wong. Leaning upon a heavy staff, his frame bowed by the weight of years, the aged Chinese walked slowly across the room and seated himself upon the great carved dragon chair facing his three countrymen. They gazed stolidly at the figure and continued to drink their tea, for they knew that the ancient law of China, that the dead walk in the midnight hours to condemn their murderers, was to be fulfilled. Mandarin Wong sat facing them for several seconds, his long fingernails upon the edge of the table. Around his neck was a purple line where the rope of human hair had strangled out his life. His glassy eyes seemed to see nothing, but to all appearance were endeavoring to pierce beyond the skyline of the infinite. Slowly, the Oriental with the drooping mustache reached down to a shelf beneath the table and drew from it a tiny cup of chased porcelain. Filling it from the great teapot, he set the cup with its steaming contents before the shadow of Mandarin Wong. A pin drop could have been heard in the room. The aged Wong bowed his head, and his fingers, laden with jade rings and ornaments of old gold, picked up the tiny cup, and he drank with the three living men. With the stoicism of the East, the three waited for the condemnation of the one who had been the slayer a few hours before. The trio gazed on the specter, not even the muscle of an eye moving, as the old man leaned over and with his nimble hands poured another cup of tea. The minutes passed as the four drank from the little cups, while the only audible sound was their low breathing. Suddenly, Mandarin Wong extended his hand and closed it over the handle of the teapot, which was standing on a disc of carved ebony. His long yellow fingers rested upon it. Then slowly, so slowly as to be almost imperceptible, his hand moved, and with it moved the teapot. Softly it turned, its spout directed first to one, and then another, till finally it rested, pointing towards the portly Oriental who sat at the right of the dead man. Then the hand vanished. The shade of Mandarin Wong disappeared in the shadows of the room, and the hush, undisturbed even by breathing it seemed, grew deeper with the passing seconds. The three Chinese still drank their tea. Before them, the empty chair where the spirit of Mandarin Wong had sat. All were staring at the teapot, for they well knew what it meant. The spout was pointed at the heart of the son of Mandarin Wong. The Oriental with the gray hair reached down into the sleeve of his robe and drew from it a wondrous piece of carved ivory, upon which were traced the most delicate flowers with tiny, twisted dragons wound among the blossoms. With his long forefinger and thumb he drew from its superb sheath a fine steel dagger, which he laid upon the tabletop, its blade pointing with the spout of the teapot. Lifting the wonderful porcelain container, he filled his cup again and sank back in his chair. A few minutes later, having finished this last cup, he rose. With him rose the other two. Crossing his hands in his sleeves, he bowed low to his companions. The Chinese with the drooping mustache folded his arms, while the son of Mandarin Wong inclined his head in dignified salutation. The two men passed slowly from the room, leaving the pot and the dagger on the table. The son of Mandarin Wong sat down in the chair facing the porcelain spout with the flaming bird traced upon it. Taking the dagger in his hand, he played with it for several seconds. A shadow seemed to pass over the room. The lantern swayed. The floor heaved and twisted. The great teapot grew larger and larger before his eyes. Lights danced in many colors, and before him stood the form of Mandarin Wong, his yellow hands upon the teapot lid. Then it grew darker and darker around him. A great blackness descended, and without a sound the son of Mandarin Wong fell forward, his head resting upon the tabletop, in his heart the dagger of justice, driven by his own hand. The gleam of the lantern shone down upon the black-robed form. It fell upon the carvings where his fingers had played but a few minutes before. It shed a faint light over the body which lay upon the teakwood couch nearby, but it gleamed most brightly upon the teapot, whose accusing spout still pointed at the son of Mandarin Wong. End of Section 3. Section 4 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Silver Souls. In a quiet part of Chinatown, in the city of San Francisco, the great Kwong Ke, prince of the House of Ming, sat upon his marvelous throne of dragons. The leering faces of the dragons seemed to encircle his gaunt, bony frame, as though to strangle it in their ebony folds. His long fingers, tipped with their golden nail-sheaths, were toying with the carvings on the arms, while his eyes were fixed upon the inlaid teakwood table before him. Upon the table stood an ivory and mother-of-pearl casket, borne upon the backs of 4 marble elephants. Ming Kwang reached over and lifted the lid of the box. There before him lay heaps of precious stones, lustrous pearls, dazzling rubies, emeralds, and diamonds glittering in the swaying light of the Chinese lanterns. The aged Chinaman gazed steadily for some time at the box and its costly contents. "It is a goodly treasure," he murmured to himself, "the treasure of the House of Ming." He lifted out the top tray, exposing another wondrous layer. They were all pearls, large and small, round and oblong, the ransom of 100 kings. Mandarin Ming loved pearls. He had always loved them. Many fortunes he had made and spent upon his pearls. He reached into the box and picked up a handful, allowing them to trickle from his long yellow fingers in a little waterfall of luminous white. "Silver souls," he sighed. "Pearls of great price, from the depths of unknown seas. Some day Ming Kwang must leave them all behind, but so be it." Several moments passed. The Oriental gazed lovingly at his jewels, then, placing them back in the wonderful case of ivory and silk, he rose, took the casket in his hands, and crossed the room to where a sliding panel stood open. Here he placed the casket in a niche and drew the molding back into position so that the treasure of the House of Ming was concealed by a flaming dragon traced in delicate lines upon the wall. Ming Kwang then parted 2 portieres and passed from sight into an inner room, where he knelt in prayer before retiring for the night. The hours slipped by. The swaying lanterns gleamed and flickered out, and the room was enveloped by a mantle of darkness, save where the tiny red coals from a smoldering incense burner glowed dimly. About 2 o'clock in the morning, there sounded at the outer door of the House of Ming Kwang a slight grating sound, then the noise of steel picking steel. A few seconds later the door opened and there entered Hatpin Jack. He held in his hand a thin wire hatpin with which he had picked the outer lock. It was his cleverness with this fine instrument and female weapon of defense that had gained his name. He looked about the room carefully and flashed an electric spotlight around the gloriously decorated Chinese apartment. "I wonder where that chink keeps 'em," he muttered. "Ling Si told me he had 'em." As the flashlight played for a moment on each piece of furniture, Hatpin Jack, with the rare clairvoyance of his tribe, shook his head. "Not round there." He looked down upon the floor and turned his spotlight on the oriental rug with which it was covered. "Maybe under that," he breathed, and in an orderly, systematic way, he picked up each corner and looked beneath. "Not there. Well then, we'll look at the walls next. Ling told me they were in this room." The light flashed from drapery to drapery, gleamed off the carvings and shimmered from the silks and satins. It went from place to place until finally it rested upon the panel with the dragon on it. "I don't know," muttered Jake, "but I got a hunch." Going over, he tapped very softly on the panel, and a hollow sound answered him back. "Ha! That sounds like it." Feeling around the moldings with nimble fingers, the burglar soon found a tiny button. As he pressed it, the wall moved away. At the same time, in some distant part of the house, a gong sounded dully, but fascinated by the casket in the niche, the man did not hear the warning nor see the movement of the silken curtain which covered the doorway. Carrying the casket to the table, he opened it and flashed his spotlight upon the contents. In returning the trays, Ming Kwang had placed the pearls in last, so that they shone in the reflected light with all their glorious beauty, until Jake literally gasped for breath. With avarice in his eyes, he picked up 2 handfuls of the shining gems and allowed them, as had Mandarin Ming earlier in the evening, to run through his fingers. Taking a small sack from his pocket, he was just ready to fill it when a voice spoke from the curtained doorway. "I am sorry to disturb my honorable friend, but I would warn him that climactic conditions are very unfavorable for him in the apartment of Ming Kwang." Hatpin Jack jumped nervously and reached for his gun, but straightening up he found himself looking into the muzzle of a heavy automatic, which was delicately held by the slender gold-tipped fingers of Ming Kwang. Jake had heard many strange stories of the Prince of the House of Ming, but never had he dreamed of seeing so strange a creature as the one who now stood before him. The tall, gaunt figure in his black, brocaded Mandarin coat, the great, hunched back, the blazing eyes, ill-concealed by the horn-rimmed spectacles, terrified Jake, but the vibrant, slowly speaking voice frightened him more than all else. "So," continued the Oriental, arching his brows, "you would steal the pearls of Ming Kwang. Did you want those pearls?"
Sure I did," said Jake nervously.
"Then you shall have them, but you must wait. You can have them only when I decide to give them to you. Now leave this house, you American, who would come like a beast of prey in the night to steal from an honest man the toils of his life." The long fingers pressed more tightly over the handle of the revolver. "Go!" Without a word, Jake turned and, with a terror he could not describe clutching at his heart, dashed from the house of Ming as though the hosts of hell were pursuing him. As he ran, he could see that tall, gaunt figure with its great bowed back watching him from every corner like some savage beast of the jungle. Every turn of the street seemed to bring some new terror, and as he raced down the dark alleyways, the hollow echo of his own feet running seemed to pursue him. Finally, he reached the doorway of a basement where he had been hiding from the vigilance of the police. Creeping in and throwing himself down on a heap of straw, he sought sleep as a refuge, but it would not come. Whenever he closed his eyes, he was tormented by specters and visions, so he rolled and tossed in feverish frenzy as the hours passed by. It was about 4:30 when a great shadow seemed to spread itself over the terrified Jake, and he felt the presence of the owner of the pearls he had tried to steal. As he listened, a voice seemed to speak to him. It was the voice of Ming Kwang. "You want my pearls, my beautiful silver souls. Ming Kwang will give you his pearls, beautiful pearls. Pearls, beautiful pearls." And the voice trailed off into nothingness. As Jake lay looking at the ceiling in helpless wonder at what he had heard, terror clenched at his heart, seeming to tighten about it as though a cord were tied there. A long oriental hand waved and circled above his head, and between its fingers was a beautiful pearl. "Pearls, beautiful pearls," the trailing voice again seemed to chant in a doleful and ominous tone. At the same instant the fingers opened and the pearl dropped, striking Jake on the top of the head. Rolling with a little clatter to the ground, it lay gleaming for a few seconds and then dissolved. A moment later, another fell, struck exactly the same place, and rolled to the ground.
"Oh God, what is this?" whined Jake. "Why is he dropping these pearls on me?"
He turned over on his face and tried to sleep, but a second later another pearl struck him on the crown of the head. Whichever way he turned, they seemed to strike him in the same place. For a time he tried to ignore them, but as there seemed to be no cessation of that monotonous dropping, a nameless fear slowly chilled his whole being. With the precision of clockwork, at regular intervals, a pearl would drop upon his head, and falling at his feet, dissolve into mist. By the time morning came, he was miserable beyond expression. When the next night came, the man was in a frenzy. Try as he would, he could not sleep, but hour after hour listened and waited for the falling of the pearls. On the following day he was wild-eyed and scarcely able to drag himself about. His amazement had given place to mortal horror. He put his hands upon his head in an effort to stop the ceaseless falling of pearls, but it seemed to pass between his fingers, to strike always upon the crown of his head. The 3rd and 4th days passed. There was no rest by night, no peace by day. Jake was now cursing and swearing to himself. He fumed and raved against that hand which was ever over his head. He drank until he was in a stupor, but each drink only added to the realism of each pearl that struck. When the morning of the 6th day broke, Hatpin was a raging maniac, wild-eyed and staring, his hands clenching and unclenching and his lips covered with froth. He dashed about the street, screaming and tearing his hair, until he came to an old loading pier on the waterfront. He staggered down the length of the pier among the boxes and bales that stood there. Still, every few seconds one of those pearls fell upon his aching head. There was no rest for him. Mandarin Wong was giving him the pearls he had so wanted. "You yellow devil!" he kept screaming. "Go away from me!" But the pearls fell just as steadily as before. He looked down at the murky water at his feet. There seemed to be no other way. He must end it. The curse of those pearls was too terrible. He waited a second to strengthen himself for the final ordeal, and as he stood hesitating, another pearl dropped with a thud upon his head. Something inside of him broke, and with a demoniacal cry, Jake jumped into the water. Even as he sank, he felt the pearls falling through the green water, striking him always in the same way, always in the same place. Then darkness surrounded him. The last thing he remembered was a little shining globe of silver light passing downward from that haunting hand and dissolving with a bubble. Mandarin Wong, Prince of the House of Ming, was again sitting in his great ebony chair. Through his fingers ran white pearls, the pearls he loved so well, pearls to adorn those for whom he cared. Beside him lay a newspaper printed in English. On the uppermost page was the story of the famous convict, Hatpin Jack, and of how his body had been found floating in San Francisco Bay. A smile played at the corners of Ming Kwang's lips. "Pearls bring responsibilities," he murmured. "Strong must the shoulders be that bear the burden of riches." Picking up a great pearl, lustrous with the life of the sea, shining and gleaming in iridescent shades between his fingers, the great Mandarin, with a soft laugh, dropped it from his yellow fingertips onto the newspaper picture of Hatpin Jack. It rolled off the paper and lay gleaming on the ebony table. "Silver souls," murmured Ming Kwang as he sat back gazing upon his treasure. End of section 4. Section 5 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Third Eye. Bang! The shot echoed through the hotel in the dead silence of the winter night. A moment later there was a dull thud as of something falling, followed by the soft patter of footsteps in the hallway and a woman's half-broken sob. Then all was still again. The sound of the shot aroused everyone in the house. Doors opened, and frightened faces appeared in the frames of light. "What has happened? Is someone killed? Was it a shot? I don't know, do you?" From door to door the questions flew along the corridors like wildfire, but no one could answer them. Almost immediately Mr. Herbert Harrison, the house detective, appeared on the scene in a dressing gown. "Where did the shot come from?" he asked, addressing the question to the occupants of the nearest doorways. "That is precisely the information with which we desire you to supply us," answered a distinguished-looking gentleman dressed in an iron-gray Van Dyke and blue nightshirt, giving the house detective a careful inspection through a gold pince-nez, and then vanishing in the direction of his wardrobe. Mr. Harrison looked along the hall at the startled faces. Then his glance fastened itself upon two doors, side by side at the extreme end of the corridor. They were the only two which had remained closed during the excitement. Many pairs of eyes followed the figure of the detective as he laid his course for these doors. In a moment he knocked sharply on one of them. He waited a moment and knocked again, but no answer came from within. He tried the door, but finding it locked, he turned his attention to the other. He rapped upon this also, but silence alone rewarded his effort. Trying this one and finding it unfastened, Harrison entered the room, closing the door behind him. Only an instant passed, although it seemed much longer to the watchers in the hall. Then the door reopened and the detective appeared, his face noticeably paler than when he entered. "What was it?" asked several at once. "Yes," reiterated the gentleman with the Van Dyke, who had reappeared upon the scene. A necktie and smoking jacket added to his raiment. "We would be, much obliged if you would elucidate this perplexing problem." "It looks like a case of murder," said Harrison. locking the door with his passkey. "Go back to your rooms, everyone, and remain there until the police arrive." Without further word, the detective disappeared in the direction of the elevator.
"I wonder who the dead person is," asked a kindly appearing old lady halfway down the hall.
"I don't know," came a shrill voice from another doorway, "but I think it's just too romantic for words."
"Brr," muttered the distinguished gentleman with the Van Dyke, his knees shaking together. "Really, if they must murder in this hotel, I would certainly consider it a favor if they would turn on the steam heat first. This is a most undesirable moment for a crime." As no one could cast any light upon the mystery, one by one the doors closed until the only sound breaking the stillness was a whisper which now and then was wafted through some keyhole. A half-hour later, 3 police detectives had arrived at the hotel. Harrison, now fully dressed, had gone with them to the room where the tragedy had occurred. Before them on the floor, illuminated by a reading lamp, lay the dead man, fully dressed, with a bullet hole in his back. There were no signs of weapons or of apparent motive for the crime. Nothing had been touched in the room, and as usual, the officers could not find the clue. One of the detectives turned to Harrison. "Have you been able to secure any information concerning the murdered man?" "Very little," replied the detective. "The name he signed on the hotel register was Professor Amos Martin. I hear he's a scientist and a globetrotter. I've also gathered from my examination here that he is an author, and connected with several well-known universities and research work. He is just back from a long stay in the Orient. These sheets on the table are the beginning of his latest book, which is entitled The Third Eye, and which looks very scientific. He seems to be basing it on some Eastern sacred writings or something like that. So far as I've been able to find out, he was not married, has no relatives, and is a long way from his original home. He appears to be well-fixed financially, and has been in the hotel 3 days short of a month." At the word Orient, the detectives pricked up their ears and looked at one another in a significant way. "You say he was just back from the Far East? That is a very important point. Do you know whether there are any Orientals in this neighborhood at the present time, especially at this hotel?" "Yes, there is a Chinaman here who came soon after the professor arrived, who is supposed to be helping him finish his great book. He may have been with him last night." "Where is his room?" asked one of the detectives. "Wait a minute, and I'll find out," replied Harrison as he stepped to the telephone near the door. While he was at the telephone, the other 3 walked over to the desk, upon which lay a great mass of typewritten manuscript. One of them picked up a sheet and read. "The third eye is a small ductless gland in the brain, known to modern science as the pineal gland. In India, China, and Tibet, I have come across great scientists who have so developed this gland, which is much more powerful than the physical eye, that they can see through solid walls and into the very secrets of the human mind." Muttered the detective, scratching his head. He continued to read. "Few people realize the powers which work through this eye when it is awakened. If they did, greater attempts would be made to revivify this partly atrophied organ of cognition. This is only possible, according to those who have aroused this power, through the turning upward of the forces playing through the segments of the spinal canal. These forces dilate the gland, which then becomes a super organ of sense orientation. In the Eastern countries, much time has been spent in the awakening and training of this highly important gland, and the purpose of my book is to show the Western world the value of this little-known organ." The detective looked at his companions, then down at the dead man on the floor, a rather peculiar expression playing on his face. Then, shrugging his shoulders, he held the paper under the light and resumed. "There are superphysical powers known to the ancients which the Western world little understands, but these secrets are still in possession of certain priests and Eastern scientists whom I have met during my travel. It is of these mysterious ones that I would write. They are found most frequently in northern India, Burma, and China, and among the lamas of Tibet. They have powers of sight far beyond those of the average individual. Their lives as ascetics and hermits, and their self-sacrifices and rigid purification have given them control over their own being, and also over others, which is positively uncanny to those unacquainted with the hidden side of human nature and the powers of the universe." "Tommy-rot," laughed the officer, throwing the paper back among its fellows. "Some people are getting dippy over this sort of stuff nowadays. And he looked like a nice, sane, sensible sort of man." The detectives gazed down on the face of the murdered scientist. "But this is the way they all get when they delve into these things. They either go insane or get killed or something." At the same instant, the house detective turned away from the telephone. The Chinaman had the room right next to this one. I hear that he spent nearly all of his time with the professor, and was here with him up to a late hour last night."
"I'd like to get my hands on that chink now,"
exclaimed one of the other detectives. Almost immediately there came a soft knock at the door. As Harrison swung it open, the men in the room were surprised to see a tall Chinese dressed in a long Mandarin gown of sober color but rich in texture. On his massive head was a tiny black cap, while a glorious peacock feather hung down his back. In his hand he carried a beautiful fan inlaid with mother-of-pearl. There was something uncanny about him. It was his face, however, which was most amazing. He had the brow of a philosopher, and his eyes, while almond-shaped, were wide apart and of such great size and brilliancy that they could be but partly concealed by the dark shell-rimmed glasses that he wore. Under his drooping mustache his mouth was fixed in a true Oriental smile, a pleasant but absolutely blank expression which hinted many things but never committed itself. He spoke in a soft purring voice, in English worthy of a college-bred man.
"My honorable friend expresses a desire to see me, so I take great pleasure in coming. It is an honor to have my presence desired by important persons, such as house detectives, and you worthy gentlemen of the police."
Somehow the thought came into the detectives' minds that this Oriental was deliberately ridiculing them, but his tone was so exemplary, and his manner so polite, that there was no excuse for taking offense, even though Harrison fancied, or was it merely his imagination, that he saw the upper lip of the Chinaman quiver slightly at times. "Are you S?" asked the hotel detective sharply, with a sense of personal discomfort, and a peculiar feeling of smallness which had crept over him since the entrance of this unusual Chinese. The Oriental bowed low.
"Ah, the honorable gentleman has taken the pains to learn my unworthy name. So much attention overwhelms me, and I can only reply by saying that I shall pray to my ancestors for your eternal salvation and the extension of your labors."
"Save your prayers for yourself," retorted Harrison. "You may need them worse than I do in the near future."
"Ah, most honorable gentleman, refuse not the prayers of your lowly servant."
And the Chinese bowed again.
"For in my country prayers returned are often needed by those who give them back."
At that instant his eyes fell on the murdered man for the first time.
"Ah!"
he exclaimed, and his almost almond eyes became mere slits.
"Murdered?"
He turned to the detective.
"Oh, so many times I've warned him to be more careful, and told him what the immortal Confucius, the giver of all wisdom, said. But it was of no avail, it seems."
"Of what did you warn him?" The Chinese tapped his jade thumb ring with his fan, and bowing low took the liberty of picking a small white thread from the inspector's coat sleeve before making a reply.
"Oh, only this, that he had certain weaknesses of which I was aware, and I've told him often that some day these little indiscretions would most likely cost him his life, and—"
The Chinese twisted his foot and gazed at the toe of it as it protruded from his Mandarin cape.
"And,"
he repeated, smiling blandly,
"it appears to have done so."
Muttered one of the detectives. "So our deceased client was subject to indiscretions." He turned to the Oriental and bowed sarcastically. "Will you please be a little more explicit?" The Chinese merely shrugged his shoulders, and with long slender fingers picked up a sheet of paper from the table. It was the title page of the professor's book.
"I should advise my honorable friends of the detective force to secure a copy of this most esteemed work, should the gods decree that it ever be finished, for I am seriously afraid that the useful organ of which it treats is not properly developed in the brain of our most worthy friend, the hotel detective."
The detectives exchanged glances, not quite sure how to act with this Oriental, who it now seemed was also slightly unbalanced. But as they themselves had nothing to work on in the form of information, they tacitly decided that they could not be any worse off by allowing the Chinese to continue. "Do you know who murdered him?" demanded Harrison.
No, no, no,"
answered the Oriental as he opened his magnificent fan to blow away some of the smoke from a none too mild cigar which one of the detectives was smoking.
"But I think I can find out for you if you wish me to do so."
The detectives again looked at one another. Then one of them spoke. "Go on, but remember that whatever you say here may be used against you."
"Oh, I don't think it will be,"
replied the Oriental.
for this is a matter between honorable friends, and as gentlemen I am going to ask you to forget what I have said when I go. In fact, to make this easier, I shall even assist you in the forgetting."
The Oriental walked to the center of the room, and, removing his black cap with its gorgeous peacock feather, he hunched his shoulders and bent his back until the dome of his massive head was pointed directly at the dead man. The detectives then saw that the top of his head was shaven clean for an area about the size of a silver dollar, and that on this spot a small green snake was traced in dark pigment. With his eyes closed and the crown of his head pointing first in this direction and then in that, the Chinese noiselessly slipped about the room. Finally he spoke in his soft musical voice.
"It was precisely as I feared. A lady called upon the professor, my esteemed friend, last evening. How many times have I warned my worthy brother of letters, even going to the extremity of presenting him with a beautiful book of proverbs by Lao Tse, and underlining in red those pertaining to his indiscretions. It was not the first visit of the fair lady, but she had married, and had come to tell the professor that their friendship must be at an end. My honorable friend was so unwise he could not understand the warnings that I gave him, although I have prayed to my ancestors to preserve him. He and the lady had a little, shall we say, misunderstanding. There was a slight struggle, which would not have occurred had he been a Chinese gentleman. My worthy friend, losing his temper, knocked the lady down with undue expression of Western energy, unpardonable in the East, and turned his back. Now it seems that the lady's husband, whose work requires him to be prepared for any emergency, had let her take one of his revolvers, so that she might defend herself from burglars or other intruders. She had brought this with her, and when my unfortunate friend turned his back, she shot him, and dropping the revolver with a cry, ran from the room.
"That's a very pretty story," sneered one of the detectives. "But you forgot one thing, Chinky. Where's the gun?"
"It is not far away," suavely answered the Chinese. He turned his head from side to side in an arc, which steadily decreased in extent until it stopped opposite Mr. Herbert Harrison. "It is in the inside coat pocket of this gentleman, the lady's husband."
End of section 5. Section 6 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. The Spirit of the Snows, as told by an old prospector.
"Yes, sir. I've been through more than most of 'em in this here country, but I don't mind telling you, partner, I'm down on my luck. If you'll stake me, I'll give it back to you some of these days when I strike mine. Honest, I will."
The old man leaned over the little table, a strange pathetic expression in his big gray eyes. He was a sourdough from the creeks, was honest Jim Harley, as straight and honest a man as ever come over the trail. He was a typical Alaskan, as the country was in the days of its glory, for though he was rough and unkempt, with grizzly beard and matted hair, Jim Harley was a gentleman from the boots up. He hadn't been very long in our camp and didn't seem to have many friends. It was whispered around that he was a man who had been something once, but he had had some kind of trouble that made him want to get away where no one would talk to him about the past. There was a queer little Jap named Haruku who helped him work his claims. They'd first met on a boat coming up the Inside Passage. Haruku had a lot of Japanese stories and legends that he would tell when he wasn't working to anybody that would listen. Jim Harley was allus fond of that kind of stuff. People used to say he was queer. And after one night when the northern lights flashed out looking like wondrous arches of coral in the sky and strange temples of gleaming fire streaked down and wavy lace curtains of light streamed across the heavens, everybody said he was crazy. After that they called him Poor Jim Harley. This evening Jim and me was setting in my cabin after a whale of a storm, but it had cleared off and looked as if we might have pleasant weather for a spell. I always felt sorry for him, so when he asked me for a steak, I handed him a 20.
"Now, Bill, I sure am obleeged to you, 'cause soon as summer comes, I'm going up in the country again, back thar in them mountains. But you know I never go up while the snow's on. No, sir, it's 20 years since I've been outdoor while it was snowing. If you'll shove up a little closer, I'll tell you what happened to me in the big snowstorm in '99 when Haruku, Rosie, and I was staking it in Nugget Creek. Well, sir, it was evening, and I plumb forget what the wife was doing, poor kid, when Haruku and I was sitting close to the stove, close as we could get, for that was the coldest snap of the year, and the snow was heaping up over the roof of our little shack. The alcohol was down 60 below, and even the malamutes was shut up, and all you could hear was the cracking of the logs. Why, you could purty nigh see 'em move, she was getting that cold. But I must tell you about Haruku first. He was a strange feller, that little Japanese. Yes, sir, as white a soul as I ever met, and no fool neither. You know, I ain't never been a religious man or nothing like that. In fact, I couldn't tell you the names of saints from sardine labels today. Of course, I knew 'em then, but it seems as though I've forgotten everything, Bill. Everything but that night. But I can tell you, I never felt in all my life so much like religion as when that little Japanese was around. He used to tell stories about Buddha and the ways of the holy men in Japan and the East. And you know, I got so I lived better and felt better every time Haruku was around me. Well, we was a-setting there, and he was a-telling me one of the most beautiful legend stories I ever heard in my life. Just then an awful heavy wind started to sigh and cry, and above it all a strange tapping sound come at the door of the cabin. I swear the little Japanese turned white, and I was powerful frightened myself, 'cause we both knew that there was 6 feet of snow in front of that door. Gently the tapping sounded again. "Yuki Onna," whispered the Japanese, grasping me by the arm. "I've heard it before, and I know what it means." "What is it?" I asked, dumbfounded. "It's the Lady of the Snows," he whispered. "She come through the silence of the storm, and death comes with her. Silently she tap. You can barely hear the gentle rapping, but she will come in before the morning and kiss one of us to everlasting sleep." I turned to the Jap to see if he was in earnest, and one look at his staring eyes and drawn face told me that he meant every word he said. "Ain't ye never heard o' the Lady of the Snows?" he whispered as the gently tapping kept a-sounding. "Who steals softly with fluttering garments and closes the eyes of those who die in the storm? She is Yuki Onna, the Lady of White, and when she taps one must go forth to join the spirits of the snow." For some minutes we sat in silence, and slowly the head of the little Japanese sunk on his chest, and I felt a funny sort of drowsiness a-creeping over me too, which I couldn't understand. I tried to sit up, but couldn't, and little by little my head too sunk on my breast, and I seemed to fall asleep. But though I couldn't move, my eyes was open, and I could see what was happening around me. The tapping continued softly on the door, and I saw the wooden beam that closed it move slowly from the old wooden socket, and gently, oh, how gently, the door opened. And in there poured an avalanche of snow, swirling, twisting, and turning, fanned by the wings of the storm. Then gradually, out of the snow appeared a strange creature. A woman of shining white, robed in glistening, gleaming snowflakes. Her skin was as white as her garments, as white as the glorious pearly waves of her hair. Yes, she was indeed a creature of snow, yet alive. She didn't have any feet, for her body trailed off in a swirl of snowflakes as she seemed to float and flutter in the cabin doorway. Without a sound she glided in, and I felt a strange chill come over me as she leaned over Haruku and me. A strange chill like that of the cold snow that marked her coming. And I remembered the time when I had been lost on the trail with my dogs dead and the grub gone, for the same chill crept over me now as then. Slowly the floating form passed on and paused before the door that led to the other room. A great fear gnawed at my soul, and in terror I tried to move. Was this white specter going to claim the one I loved? I couldn't stir, and all I could do was to watch in agony. The door opened little by little, and a figure of blinding snowflakes passed in. Only a few minutes went by, and then the door opened again. But there was 2 shining figures instead of 1. I give a scream of mortal agony, for my wife was the second figure of shining snowflakes that went out into the world of swirling death and gleaming sleet. Then the door closed, and the room seemed just as it had been before. It was just about that time that something snapped in me, and all went black. When I come to, I found Haruku trying to bring me back to consciousness. The first words I asked him was "a Rosie," and he sadly shook his head. "Yukiona has took her away," he whispered softly. And true enough, the girl I loved was dead, stolen away by that cursed spirit of the snow. An open shutter, a frozen form, a room filled with swirling snowflakes was all that remained to tell of the tragedy of my life. Well, sir, I told Haruku how the second figure had gone with the first. "Yes," he said, "she has gone forever. She has become another spirit of the snow. For all who die in the frozen Northlands become spirit of the snow and live forever in the soft and crystal whiteness of the snowflakes." Well, sir, that's my story. Yes, sir, and it's true. I ain't never been the same since that night, Bill, for my Rosie took my heart with her out there into the snow, out there into the wintry night, where she now lives forever as one of the spirits of the snow. So I never go out into the snowstorm now, 'cause I don't want to see her out there, living, dancing, swaying in her robes of shining colors, and like Yukiona, kissing the wanderers to sleep as they join her in rendezvous with death. She's there, partner. She's there. And somehow I know that someday I'll be with her out in that eternal whiteness. I know you think I'm crazy, Bill. They all do, but I ain't. It's God's gospel truth. But thanks for the poke, partner. I'm a-going out soon as the snow clears to stake a richin' in them mountains. 'Cause I know it's there, and I want all kinds of money. Yes, sir. Just to pay up all my friends that have been kind to me. And when I find that big stake, it's going to be worth millions. And I'm going to stake you a quarter interest, partner, for the 20 you lent me tonight. Goodbye, partner. I must be a-going. I want to get a plug, a horseshoe, at the company store. God bless you, Bill, and whatever you do. When you go out in the snow, remember, Yukiona who'll come sure as fate, and you'll hear her knocking at your cabin door."
Jim Harley staggered to his feet and, pulling his rough hat down over his matted hair, lurched out into the cold Alaskan night. And that's the last time Jim Harley was ever seen alive, when he left my cabin door. He hadn't been gone but a few minutes when the blizzard broke again, blinding sheets of snow and swirling sleet that lasted for many hours. When it stopped and the temperature went up, they found Jim Harley dead in the snow just a few rods from my cabin. His face had a happy look, so I kind of reckon the Lady of the Snow must have found Jim too. And as her white form bent over him and her cold lips rested on his forehead, I kind of guess he must have looked up and seen the face of his Rosie who died so many years before. I'm just a-saying that 'cause he looked so happy. Every time it snows, I can't help but think that maybe the spirits of Jim Harley and his Rosie are somewheres among the snowflakes. There ain't no telling. Maybe one of these days I'll wander out in the snow, getting adrift on the Great White Pass or lined up on the White Horse. Maybe I'll be out there somewheres with Jim Harley and Rosie, 'cause Haruku says that all who die in the snow live on forever in the snowflakes. End of Section 6. Section 7 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Lota of the Great God Shiva. His Holiness, Sri Brahma Radhavan Gupta, sat under his umbrella of woven rattan on the lowest steps of the Manikarnika Ghat. The Ganges River, murky with the ashes of the dead, flowed at his feet, and the smoke from the burning funeral pyres enveloped him. The great saint was far advanced in years. His long unkempt hair streamed about his shoulders, and a matted white beard hung down upon his breast. On his forehead was a complicated caste mark, which added to the strangeness of his appearance. His Holiness wore for clothing a simple yellow cloth, and from his shoulders hung many necklaces and rosaries of wooden beads, worn smooth by incessant handling. His feet were crossed under him in true Oriental fashion, and in his lap rested a book written in some unknown language upon strips of specially prepared palm leaves. He turned the pages slowly, murmuring mantras. On the ground beside the aged ascetic were grouped all of his earthly possessions. A little bundle containing a nondescript collection of sacred relics and some scanty provisions lay open at his left. To the right, and shaded by the great umbrella, stood his water lota. It was of most peculiar shape and extraordinary pattern. It was much larger than the brass bowls usually carried by holy men. Such a cup with a crudely shaped spoon is part of the equipment of every wandering mendicant, who fills it from the muddy waters of the sacred river, Then, climbing long flights of steps which lead to the shrines far up on the bank of the Ganges, they dip their spoons into the sanctified water and throw it upon the great stone lingams that stand at intervals along the riverfront. The Lota of Raghavan Gupta was a sacred relic. Only two knew the history of it and understood its magical powers. The great saint himself and a certain Hassan Ali, a Mohammedan who guided tourists. The sacred bowl had belonged to the great god Shiva, while he walked the earth a religious mendicant. When he returned to heaven, Shiva bestowed it upon one of his faithful disciples. After many generations, it came into the possession of the great sage sitting under the reed umbrella. The strange urn-shaped bowl, with its intricately carved cover, had the magic power of absorbing into itself all liquids with which it came in contact. When the great Shiva was wandering in the desert, he was wont to lay the lota upon the sand, and it would draw water from far beneath the surface, so that it would become immediately full. If he placed it near wine jars, the liquid passed from the earthen containers into the magic lota. Whoever owned it was never thirsty. Along the stone-paved ghats, a group of tourists were coming, a motley group, most of them away from home for the first time. They listened with open-mouthed wonder to the skillful lying of their beturbaned guide. This personage, of exotic and swarthy appearance, was attired in native white bloomer pants and grey Norfolk jacket. He wore an English shirt, and color was lent to his attire by a red necktie. It was Hassan Ali. Passing the umbrella under which sat the Eastern Master with the sacred lota beside him, Hassan gazed enviously at the meditating figure. He cared nothing for holy men, but he knew wealthy travelers who would pay many thousands of rupees for the brass water bowl. The Hindu saint raised his eyes and gazed contemptuously into the sinister face of the guide. Then turning to a disciple who sat cross-legged a little way off, Raghavan Gupta muttered, "I like not the looks of yonder infidel. He desires my sacred water lota. Some day he will try to steal it, but let him beware, for such relics are not for his unclean hands." About 2 weeks later, Hassan Ali had his chance. A holy Brahmin who had sat for many years on a bed of spikes in a neighboring temple had just died, and a procession was forming. At its head were 6 men carrying on a litter the body of the deceased, seated on a rough throne covered with wreaths of native flowers. The tourists gathered to watch the burial. Holy men are too sacred to be burned, and are allowed to float on rough barges down the slowly flowing river to the sea. The only one who seemed unmoved by the growing excitement was the great saint under his rattan umbrella. Soon he was deserted, left sitting alone on the steps of the ghat, for even his disciples had joined the throng gathering to watch the last rites for the dead Brahmin. Raghavan Gupta stirred uneasily. His sensitive mind had picked up a thought from somewhere in the ethers. Leaning over, he reached out and, grasping the great lota, he poured its contents into the Ganges that flowed at his feet. He replaced it inverted beside him so that the open mouth faced the ground. He then laid the lid by its side. "Now it will hold nothing," he murmured, and resumed his labor of contemplation. A few minutes later, a long claw-like brown hand reached out from behind the umbrella. It was the hand of Hassan Ali. As silently as a ghost, he had crept up from the rear, and was concealed from sight by the immense tilted sunshade. With one quick motion he drew the lota out of sight, and with another he picked up the lid, placed it upon the bowl, and turning crept away a few yards. It was then that one of the disciples of the great saint saw him with the master's water bowl. Running to the guru, he cried out, "O most holy one! That villainous guide is now running away among the crowd with your lota." The aged ascetic bowed his head. "I knew he would do that, for his thought came to me through the air, so I emptied the vessel. Follow him, and you will behold a miracle, for the sacred lota is well able to protect itself." With a bow, the shaven-headed youth vanished in the direction with which he had seen Hassan Ali take. That worthy individual, discovering that he was followed, opened his shirt and, hiding the lota therein, ran quickly into the twisted streets lined with bazaars. From the streets of the silversmiths he passed into the thoroughfare of the rug-makers. He dodged behind a shrine of Kali, which was still splashed with the blood of the morning offering, and vanished in the direction of the mosque of Aurangzeb. The disciple followed him with an ease that was almost uncanny. He seemed to sense the fleeing thief and was never more than a few yards behind. Suddenly, over Hassan Ali there came a strange feeling. His feet began to drag. His knees wobbled under him. He felt that he must sit down and rest. Never before had that strong, wiry man been so exhausted. The landscape around him grew dim and hazy. The streets began to sway. The passer-by assumed distorted shapes. The ground seemed to drop from under him. Suddenly he stumbled. He tried in vain to retain his balance. The stones beneath rose up like mighty boulders, and without a sound he collapsed in the road, directly in front of a shop owned and run by a Kashmir silk dealer. When the white-robed Chella reached his side and leaned over him, Hassan Ali was faintly conscious of two eyes gazing down into his, and then all grew black forever. Opening the front of his shirt, the Chella took from the recumbent form the Lota of strangely carved brass. He was surprised at its weight, but without lifting the lid, he held it reverently before him, and returned to the great saint who still sat in peaceful contemplation under his umbrella.
Master, it was as you said. A miracle has occurred, for the thief suddenly fell on the street. When I came up to him, his face was pale and drawn, and his eyes were glassy. He was dying, and before I could pluck the Lota from within his shirt, he had ceased to breathe.
Taking the bowl from the hand of his disciple, the aged holy man noted its added weight.
"As I thought," murmured Raghavan Gupta. "This Lota draws to itself whatever liquid may be near it. For that reason I emptied it when I knew that foul reprobate Hassan Ali was about to steal it. He hid it next to his heart. Behold!"
Opening the brass urn, the holy man leaned over to pour its contents into the Ganges. The Chela watched his actions, suddenly uttered a cry of horror. The Lota was filled with blood. End of section 7. Section 8 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Temple of Sin. In the heart of Chinese Mongolia, that little-known land of magic and sorcery, stands a strange red and yellow pagoda-like building. It is concealed in the wastes of a mighty range of mountains where white men seldom travel, and is almost a myth even to the natives themselves. From the corners of this grotesque structure hang strange lanterns of bamboo and silk, bearing upon them oriental designs and crude Chinese characters. A great flight of granite steps leads sheer up from the valley below, through an avenue of tablets, and at last ends in a lattice-work door carved and lacquered in designs of dragons and gloriously plumed pheasants. On either side of the gate of this lonely temple stands a great dog of grotesquely colored porcelain, and on the base of each pillar where they stand is written one word. The dog upon the right carries the name Mirth, and the one on the left, Wrath. For many years these two animals, with their glistening porcelain bodies and heads maned like lions, their sharp teeth gleaming and their great eyes staring, have stood guard at the entrance to the Temple of Sin, one of the strangest of the mysterious remnants of forgotten ages. This temple is served and upheld by a small group of priests who stand firmly among the tottering creeds of ancient days, guarding with fanatical faith this temple built by the hands of the gods to mark the place where the first man sinned on earth. The high priest of this temple is a most unusual personage, a tall, gaunt Chinese of angular and sinister frame, dressed in robes of yellow broadcloth, ornately brocaded with flowers and edged with a crimson border. He wears upon his back a great Chinese symbol, which means, when translated, immortality forever. And upon the chest of his garment another which signifies mortality unbroken. No one knows the age of this Chinese priest, but tradition says it can be counted in hundreds of years, and as you look down at his wizened face, dried, seamed, and browned, you can well believe that he really is as old as those barren mountains and withered lands that surround the temple. They say that this spot is shunned like a death area, for since the beginning of time it was meant to be visited by the sinners of the world only. The old priest, with his hands crossed in his sleeves, was walking softly up and down behind the lattice-work of elaborately carved and gilded teak. A faint odor of incense was borne outward by the gentle breeze, filling the air with the pungent aroma of burning sandalwood, while now and then the dull boom of a temple gong told that the services of the gods were not forgotten, and that the priests were gathered to pray. Suddenly the old man held up a long finger, its nail encrusted with gold, and curling some 3 inches beyond the fingertip. His wizened, slanty eyes opened wide and their whites, yellowed with age, shone like pieces of amber.
"Someone is coming over the pass of death,"
he whispered, pointing south. As he spoke, the priests in their yellow robes gathered around him and looked where his finger indicated. And truly enough, a thin line of dark forms could be seen in the distance, winding in and out among the hills. The aged Oriental looked long and earnestly.
"He is a white man,"
he said, after a while,
"and he comes with a pack train. He is seeking rugs, rare silks, and precious cargoes. Beware, lest he rob the temple. Close all the doors, save one, and let the guardian dogs watch his passing."
The monks bowed silently, and folding their arms in their sleeves, vanished like shadows in the temple passageway. The old priest turned and entered the shrine room, the tinkling bells and jangling ornaments of his golden helmet sounding musically as he walked. Passing over the floor, soft with furs and precious rugs, he opened the doors of a small shrine, and there before him, clasped in the claws of a teakwood dragon, stood a tiny mirror. It shone and gleamed with a depthless light, and from its burnished surface were reflected many little flames that burned in sockets on the wall. The old priest bent his great hunched shoulders forward, and his queue, braided with silken cords, fell over one shoulder.
"Oh, mirror of Kwang Ke, creator of all that is, first being of all earth, there comes over yonder desert one who, my soul whispers, is seeking to desecrate thy shrine."
He raised his thumb, which bore upon it a great ring of jade, and, closing the doors, placed over the crack where they joined a soft wax pellet, upon which he pressed the signet ring, leaving stamped there the cipher of the emperor.
"By the jade of the first dynasty, may the emperor of gods protect the shrine of this sacred mirror. May the five-clawed dragon twine himself round this altar, that the defiler may not enter, for it is not the will of the gods that the mirror of sin shall be stolen."
Then turning, he passed from the room as silently as a yellow spectre, and out into the courtyard of the temple. At about the same time, Hank Nicholson, buyer and importer representing one of our largest Fifth Avenue stores, put his foot on the lowest step of the temple. Hank Nicholson was a bad man, but he always valued his bravado more than anyone else did. He unclipped his revolver holster and with a hitch of his belt leaped up the steps towards the porcelain dogs, one of which grinned while the other leered in stony salutation. Hank spoke fairly good Chinese and several dialects, and soon made himself understood. "I heard about this outfit in Peking. I'm looking for rugs and curios. Any good teakwood, ivory, hammered brass, or idols that you may have around. Sabi?" Hank held up a string of Chinese money and shook it under the nose of the aged Oriental, in whose eyes was a strange glint, but who kept perfectly poised as he gazed into the flat face in front of him and surveyed the shock of red hair that was Hank's crowning glory. He then spoke slowly.
"This is no place of merchandise, of gold or silver, or of ivory. This is the temple of a true god, and has been known for ages as the chapel of the first sin. Here I live with a small group of priests, having no intercourse with the world of men. It is useless for you to seek here, since I have nothing to barter, to buy, or to sell. I am a servant of God, and not a silversmith."
"Oh, bosh and nonsense," exclaimed Hank. "I've heard that before. How many mechs for the whole damn temple and everything in it? Except for you. I'm looking for antiques and curios, but don't want anything as funny as you. Come on, Chinky, get out of the way and let's see what you got." The Oriental bowed patiently and, stepping aside, allowed the exponent of Western diplomacy to enter. Hank stood in the inner doorway, arms akimbo, and viewed the surroundings with an air of complacency. "I'll get $500,000 for this on Broadway," he announced confidently. "How much, Chinky?"
"I have told you, white man, I have nothing to sell."
Hank pressed with the toe of his shoe a rug before him. "That's a fine rug, Chinky. Looks like a piece of genuine Tibet silk. You got some good teakwood here, too. I'll have some of my men come right in and pack it up." The priest bowed with great deference, but there was a wicked glint in his beady black eyes.
"I must remind the white man of what I said before. This is a temple of God, and not a curio store.
God will defend his temple."
The American laughed. "A fine bunch of gods you got, Chinky. I own 3 of them that I used for bootjacks, and they haven't answered me back yet. Don't get sentimental with your religion now, because when Hank Nicholson wants something, he gets it, see?" And Hank pulled out his revolver and nestled it against the priest's side. The Oriental looked mildly down on the gun and replied,
3 times have I enjoyed white man's civility, and, alas, it has always been the same. The first white man I entertained stole my jades. The second robbed me of my temple maiden. And you, honorable sir, would take the building and all. I fear you must come to China and learn manners." Hank stood nonplussed for a moment, and then turned back to look over the room. Gazing around, his eye rested upon the shrine bearing on its closed doors the waxen seal. "What's that?" he demanded. "In yonder shrine," was the reply, "is the mirror of sin, made upon the eyeball of the god of light. It is the most precious thing in all China, and rests in the claws of the sacred dragon. Those who have endured great agony and wish to expiate their guilt come from all parts of the world to pay homage to this mirror, for as they gaze into its depths, they can see the reason for their suffering and are shown the sins for which they are accursed."
"Oh," said Hank. "A mirror with a story like that would bring $10,000 on Broadway."
"I know not what your wide avenue is," answered the priest, "but if it be a place, the mirror shall not rest there. In my hands I carry a temple bell. If you do not leave this holy place at once, I shall ring for my priests, and, if I so order them, they will slay you where you stand, and sever your body into as many pieces as yon chrysanthemum has petals."
Recognizing the flint in the old man's voice, Hank decided to retreat. He passed silently down the steps and out of the temple, but in his mind a plan was formulating, a plan such as has thrilled the hearts of practically every robber developed by Western civilization. The American withdrew a little distance where he made camp and the coolies unpacked their burdens. As evening fell and shrouded the temple with its mystic lattice work, a gleaming spark a few 100 feet away marked the resting place of Hank Nicholson and his pack train. Slowly the monks filed out of the place of worship and into the little huts among the rocks, where they slept and prayed. And lastly, the old high priest, swinging together the temple grating, glided like a phantom from the shrine. There was no moon that night, but the stars shone down and lighted the earth with 1,000,000 points of light. When a chill breeze told of coming dawn, Hank unrolled his blanket and in the darkness crept across the sand, among the rocks, towards the gate of the Temple of Sin. The 2 porcelain dogs looked down in silence as he passed between them, and stood before the hand-carved wooden grating. An ancient lock secured the door, but this he quickly mastered, and a little later was creeping stealthily into the inner shrine. The flickering oil lamp still dimly lighted the room. With an expression of diabolical greed on his face, Hank rolled up rug after rug, and his itching fingers played lovingly over the rare porcelains and carvings. At last his eye rested on the shrine, and something irresistible drew him over towards it. "So the old Chinaman says," muttered Hank, "that whoever looks into that mirror can see pass before him all the sins he ever committed. That's a fine story, but I'll wager it won't show up some of the little private secrets of my life." He looked at the seal of wax for several seconds, and then grasping the 2 lower handles drew open the door, breaking the seal. In the alcove stood the mirror, a gleaming mother of pearl held between the claws of the great dragon, like some diamond in a Tiffany setting. A pale glow radiated from it, and the American gazed into it in spite of himself. As he did so, he shrank back in amazement. A scene was unrolling itself before him. Suddenly, Hank Nicholson gave a scream, and covering his eyes with his hands, dashed madly from the room, uttering cries like a madman. "No! No! God! Not that! That wasn't me!" And his hurrying footsteps sounded on the steps of the temple while the grated door closed silently behind him. From the gloom which bordered the edge of the room emerged a silent figure, his hands clasped in the sleeves of his coat. The old priest's eyes followed the American. Then kneeling before the mirror, he muttered, "None there are who can gaze unafraid into the mirror of sin. None can desecrate the holy temple of God and escape." From out of the night, a great moaning howl broke the stillness. the cry of a great dog sounding weird and eerie in the silence. With it came a scream of mortal agony, and then all was quiet. The priest, carrying a little lamp in his hand, passed out from under the gates of the temple, and a gleaming light was reflected from the great porcelain dogs that guarded the threshold. For a brief moment the stoic complacency of his face was broken, and then his amber eyes narrowed again. Hanging in the air, clenched between the teeth of the porcelain dog called Wrath, was the figure of the American buyer. And there it remained until the vultures came. None knew how it happened to be there, held tightly by the great fangs of the image. But to this day the story is told, and the great dog with the red blood stains upon its mouth and teeth still stands as the silent guardian at the gate of the Temple of Sin. End of Section 8. Section 9 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Dance of the Veils. It was in the native quarter of the city of Agra that the first act of a strange drama took place. There is no spot in all India more picturesque, more unusual with its domes and mosques, its wondrous tombs and latticed palaces, than the ancient city of Agra, the gem of India, known all over the world as the city of the Taj Mahal. The native quarter, however, is not different from that of other eastern cities, with its bazaars and shops, its merchants, its dogs, its filth, and little running children that are eternally tangling themselves up in the feet of the passer-by. Here, dressed in a spick-and-span white suit with a pith helmet and a flowing fly-screen, walked John Thurlow, retired American racetrack expert and prize fight promoter, who, after a successful life at the plying of his trade, was now globe-trotting in order to get an inside tip on things, as he expressed it. John Thurlow was a florid-faced man some 50 years of age. He was built on generous lines with 3 layers of superfluous neck draped over his collar, while in the absence of a vest, a large linked gold watch chain extended from one trouser pocket to the other. He was decidedly overweight, and from time to time he took off his helmet and wiped the perspiration from a perfectly shiny head, sans every sign of hair. 2 small eyes gleamed out like those of a contented hog from a tiny crevice between eyebrows and cheek, which threatened to close entirely if he ate much more. The 18th Amendment meant absolutely nothing to John, but to fairly respectable American whiskey he had added infinitely worse Oriental concoctions, which, in his own words, could kick the side out of the Statue of Liberty. John Thurlow was one of those individuals with whom pomposity is an innate quality. Everything he had went to front, both mentally and physically, and as he half walked, half waddled among the bazaars, mild Orientals viewed him with strange expressions, mangy dogs looked at him inquiringly, while heavily veiled women went on the other side of the street. John Thurlow was out for what he could get, his recommendation being a long pocketbook and an exceptionally short conscience. A little wiggling brown urchin accomplished the apparently superhuman exploit of crawling in between his feet, which were long, large, and ponderous. Cursing, Thurlow brought a heavy snakewood cane down across the child's body with a resounding whack. With a howl, the streak of brown lightning vanished somewhere among the swaying portieres of the bazaars. A few beggars held out their hands for annas, but Thurlow was not there for the purpose of financing India, so he passed on with a disdainful look and wound his way with morose dignity among the bazaars and narrow streets. A whiff of a strange odor suddenly reached his nostrils, and his olfactory nerves dilated. He stopped, took off his hat, and fanned himself for the 1000th time that day. "Ah," he murmured, "this is the first decent breath I've had today. They surely can raise stinks in this country." He was standing in the shade of the awning of an Oriental perfume bazaar, and it seemed an oasis of enchantment compared to the city sewerage which lay on the streets in front of him. Thurlow saw opening before him a series of arches where the narrow streets looked ready to come together, and were separated only by spans of clay and plaster. He passed under one of these arches and found himself in a deserted niche where the traffic of the thoroughfare did not apparently enter. While he stood there, from the house beside him a man madly dashed, howling like a maniac, and pouring forth streams of English profanity. Thurlow turned and looked at the figure. It was that of a white man, but his long unkempt hair and beard and his skin, tanned by the Indian sun, almost gave him the appearance of an Asiatic. His clothes had originally been white duck, but they were now torn, soiled, and battered, until their native color was almost obliterated. In one hand, this strange figure clenched some object, while with the other he seemed trying to disentangle himself from some invisible network.
"Get away, you red demons!" he screamed. "You can't have it! You can't have it! Get away, damn you!"
He spun around, twisting, tearing, and clenching at the air, his eyes wild and bloodshot, and his whole being that of a madman. Suddenly he spied Thurlow and rushed up to him in the apparent frenzy of desperation.
"My God! You're a white man!"
he cried, falling upon his knees before the corpulent form of the American racetrack magnate. Then, in a wild, discordant voice, he babbled forth an almost unintelligible harangue.
"They've got me,"
he kept muttering.
"The red fiends have got me."
Thurlow looked down coolly. "Opium or hashish?" he asked, wiping his face once more. "I've made amends selling them, but I don't advocate their use."
"No, no!" shrieked the other. "It's not dope! It's red devils! It's red devils!"
"Sounds like Indian hemp to me," answered Thurlow. "But what do you want?"
"You're a white man, and you'll do something if I ask you, won't you?"
"What is it?" asked Thurlow. "I found it don't pay to make rash promises."
"I'll tell you," gasped the other. "A year ago, I was just as prosperous and well-heeled as you are. I came out here to India for a special reason. I went up into the North Mountains, way north, to a temple that had been sacred for many ages to Krishna, the great Brahmin god. Get away from me, you red devils! I can see you blinking at me, but get away, damn you!"
The disheveled figure broke into a grating, unearthly laugh.
"I stole it! I stole it!"
he shouted.
"I stole the Eye of Krishna, and I've got it still, but they've sent red devils after me. Promise me that you'll take it back to them when I'm dead, or they will haunt me in hell forever. Promise me you'll take the eye back. Here on this paper is the place to take it to. Promise me you'll do it."
"All right," answered Thurlow. "What is it, a glass eye?"
No, came the answer distractedly. "Here, you will take it? The demons are strangling me. Help! Help!"
And quickly slipping the little package into Thurlow's hand, the man leaped to his feet. Clutching at his throat, he rushed directly toward the wall of a bazaar opposite. He battered himself against the wall, howling, "Red demons!" Then suddenly, straightening up his body, began to waver in a strange, unearthly way. His eyes gazed into the depths of the unknown. "What on earth is he doing?" exclaimed Thurlow. Then the thought flashed into his mind that the frenzied creature was dancing. Though no sound was audible, the figure swayed to the rhythm of some oriental knock tune. Back and forth he swung, his movements becoming more and more eccentric. The American followed him as he passed down the street, moving through this fantastic pantomime, while the passerby stepped fearfully aside. Suddenly he whirled past a bazaar filled with the wondrous specimens of gold and silverwork, where steel scimitars and inlaid daggers were exhibited to the throng. The frenzied and obsessed dancer seized one of the scimitars and, spinning it in his hand, twisted his body backward and forward in the ancient Hindu dance of death, the sword gleaming and swishing through the air in curious parabolas. At the same time, the bearded figure, with its wild face and ragged form, laughed and screamed. Gradually the movements became slower, and at last, exhausted, the figure sank to the ground. And when the crowd reached it, they found that in falling, the scimitar had passed through the body. The crazed man was dead. Having seen one end of the story, Thurlow now turned to the package in his hand, and unwrapping it, he gave a gasp of amazement. He was staring down upon a great blue-white diamond, as large as a pigeon's egg, gloriously cut in the manner of ancient India, and appearing more like a flaming torch in his hand than a piece of stone. Thurlow staggered back against a supporting arch. "Good heavens," he muttered. "That stone is worth millions. So that is the Eye of Krishna. That bird sure had some eyes. Give it back? Give the stone back to these greasy heathens? Not much. Oh, I'll give it back. John Thurlow, this stone alone makes you many times a millionaire. You know, the more I see of this country, the better I like it." Slipping the jewel into his pocket, he slowly threaded his way along the streets until he again reached his room in a well-known European hotel. Locking the door and placing a chair against it, Thurlow sat down on a three-legged stool and took out the diamond. As he did so, a voice whispered in his ear, "Take it back. Take it back. Take it back." "Like hell I'll take it back," muttered Thurlow. "When little Johnny gets his hands on it, only a pickaxe will pry it loose. Why, this rock is as big as the Koh-i-Noor, and I understand that they built a tower over in London to put that in. My history ain't very good, but I seem to have great luck in picking up diamonds." The voice kept whispering, "Take it back. Take it back. Take it back." "Those little red demons ain't gonna frighten me. This belongs to yours truly from now on." And flipping it in the air with his thumb, John Thurlow spun around and caught it as it came down. "Pretty soft, I'll say." He went to his valise, opened a little leather bag, put the jewel into it, and placing the stone and bag together under his pillow, prepared for the night. John Thurlow had not developed a delicate nervous system. His constitution was more animal than human. Consequently, no chills ran up and down his spine, no worries beset his soul, and lying flat on his back with his eyes on the ceiling, his lids slowly fell. With them, his lower jaw. And John Thurlow, racetrack plutocrat and present owner of the Eye of Krishna, entered peacefully into slumberland, his long rhythmic snores reverberating through the room. 3 hours went by in perfect stillness, and it seemed as if Thurlow's peaceful dreams were not to be disturbed. But all at once, under his window, appeared a slender turbaned form, his arms folded. The figure was dressed in well-fitting English clothes, but his face was that of an Oriental. He walked slowly up and down, looking up at the open window in Thurlow's room, where calmly reposed the rotund form of that gentleman. The sleeper was not awakened by the soft turning of the doorknob, but this attempt to enter was foiled by the chair against the door. A few seconds passed, and from the edge of the roof above there was lowered a thin silken cord, on the end of which hung a tiny incense burner of bronze, carefully padded. This swung back and forth in the window of Thurlow's room, and then its motion changed. The hand above was swinging it far into the interior of the room. At last, with a very long swing, it crossed over the window sill, and was lowered with the slightest thud onto the floor. From it poured a stream of fine blue smoke, the pure hashish of the Orient prepared in the temple, and certain in its effect. Many moments elapsed, for in the East nothing is done hastily. The fine blue pencil of smoke was driven by the gentle breeze about the room, which slowly became hazy with its fumes. Thurlow slept on serenely, but gradually into his slumber crept fantastic dreams which were not wont to disturb his tranquillity. He seemed to be in an unknown place, filled with clouds and dancing lights, and he swayed among these lights like a creature in a dream. But all had the appearance of reality. Then through the thick clouds were visible red flaming faces, which leered at him with horrible bloodshot eyes. Somehow he realized in his sleep that these were the red devils that had tormented the crazed man on the street a few hours before. Voices began to speak to him, always whispering of the diamond. John Thurlow stirred in his bed uneasily and rolled over on his side. He tried to wake up, but a great weight seemed to be upon him. Something was pressing down on his chest, and his breath came in short gasps. He tried to sit up, but fell back in a stupor. The red, leering faces came ever closer to him. He swept his hand across his face, in an effort to drive them away, but they only laughed. He did not know that they were the jinns appointed to protect the treasure of Krishna's eye. Thurlow was now tossing and twisting in his bed. His eyes were open, but he was still asleep. At last he rose, and his hand felt under the pillow where the diamond was.
"No, you shan't have it," he kept muttering. "It's mine. It's mine. Get away from me, you hell demons. It's my diamond. It's my diamond."
And he lurched to the other side of the bed. As he sat there, a curious sound suddenly became audible. It was the weird cadence of Eastern music like that of the dancing girls on the streets. And in the semi-darkness his eyes saw a singular veiled form that swayed and twisted in rhythm with the music. A houri of the opium dreamer. This figure undulated back and forth in its misty draperies, circling round and round Thurlow in a wild dance of the East. Soft black eyes gazed at him, and a curving form whirled amid the veils, holding out to him long, beckoning arms. Thurlow rose to his feet and stretched out his arms to the figure, his glazed eyes seeing only the beings of another world. Hesitatingly, he joined the frenzied dance. The soft notes of a flute and the endless throb of a drum inspired him, so round and round he twirled with the veiled creature of his dream. This mystic figure drew closer its veils, through which the slender form but faintly shone, and drew ever nearer to the window. Thurlow followed her, weaving and swaying as though wrapped in the veils of the dancer. Through the silence came the soft jingle of anklets and clinking jewelry, while the delicious odor of oriental incense and rare perfumes seemed to fill the air. With hands outstretched, Thurlow, moving to the same magic measure as had the man on the street the day before, reached the window. The alluring figure floated out into the vapors beyond, still calling, still enticing. Thurlow stepped up onto the windowsill, still twirling to the eerie music, and after one moment's hesitation, leaped off into space. Like a rock, the body of the American fell to the ground, landing with an awful thud beside the Hindu watcher. The Oriental, his hands still folded, gazed down upon the crumpled form at his feet. The American was dead, his neck broken by the fall. Leaning over, the Hindu took from the hand of the dead man the little brown leather sack that contained the eye of Krishna, and in reverence he clasped it to his heart. "The god protect their own," he murmured, "and the jinns, the red demons from the Scarlet Lake, forever entwine this holy object with their shielding presence." A few seconds later, another Oriental met the first. In his hand was the little incense burner and the silken line which he had lowered into the window. Together they vanished into the night in the direction of the temple where belonged the sacred eye of Krishna. End of section 9. Section 10 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Emerald Tablet. 2 camels, bearing upon their backs varicolored hoodas, were moving swiftly over the yellow sand, the occupants of the swaying platforms shaded from the hot desert sun by the curtains and networks of silken wool. One of these desert ships was a gigantic black dromedary, while the other was a much smaller tan-colored camel. Seldom has such an animal been seen as that great black dromedary. Its short glossy hair seemed to shine with the sheen of the desert sun, and it was draped from head to tail in cords and bangles, many of the purest gold. The driving reins were fringed with tinkling tassels of metal, and the stately beast placed its feet upon the sand with a slow, methodical dignity, which was uncommon even in a land where dignity and grace predominate. At the very top of the hoodah gleamed a star of solid gold, from which streamed the many-colored awnings which hung nearly to the ground. Seated on the great black camel was a strange figure, a slender, fierce-looking man of 45 or 50 years of age, his face swarthy and tanned by the desert sun, and its lines accentuated by a jet-black beard which forked in neatly trimmed points. He was robed from head to foot in white, save for his boots, which protruded as tips of red leather as he sat cross-legged upon the cushions. Over his head was a fold of white cloth, held in place by a twisted band of varicolored cords. Thrust into his wide white sash was a scimitar of pure Damascus steel, while an Arabian rifle, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and gold, swung at his side, its long barrel protruding far over the side of the camel. His companion, on the other hand, was as simply mounted and attired as one could imagine. Plainness and severity marked him as another extreme in this land of extremes. His camel was mediocre, and its trappings were few. This rider was unarmed and was of a different race from his companion. His skin was white, and 2 blue eyes shone out from a face chiseled like that of a Greek god. He was dressed in an unadorned white robe, and upon his feet were leathern sandals. His eyes and head were shaded from the sun by a canopy, but the plain awnings showed no decoration. He guided his mount with a simple braided cord. Slowly the 2 great beasts, carrying such contrasting burdens, mounted a great rolling dune, and before them, as far as the eye could see, stretched an endless waste of desert sand. Far off in the blue haze towered fantastic mountains in purple and gray, but of living thing or growing shrub there was no sign.
"Where are we bound, master?"
asked the youth, turning to the imposing figure that towered above him on the back of the dromedary. His swarthy-faced companion pointed a finger, studded with rings of gold and silver, toward the deep haze of the desert. "There," he answered in a voice deep, and yet strangely mellow and inspiring. The youth gazed in the direction indicated, but saw only a vague mist resting on the desert.
"What is that place?"
he asked. "That," came the answer, "is the land of the mirage.
where still float in the ethers the temples of races long dead, where great seas lure the dying traveler to his end, only to vanish again in the limitless horizon. There across the sky wander caravans which passed this way before the silent kings were laid to rest in their tombs along the Nile. Still in the morning lights they file along. There stands also that wondrous building, amidst whose domed arches and lofty pillars is hidden the knowledge that you have come to seek. For in that shining place are the lost libraries of the dead, and we are now traveling along the way where once the caravans wound out of Egypt, carrying with them the papyrus scrolls, the Chaldean tablets, and the Phoenician stones, bringing them to this their present resting place. Here are preserved today the terracotta cylinders of Babylon. On them the history of lost races and the accounts of empires now unknown. From the western land you have come, properly recommended to seek these treasures of an ancient people, and I have come from the city of the mirage to take you to them. With a command to the dromedary, which seemed to understand his every word, the strange figure forged ahead, swinging and swaying in his moving houdah, as though in a small boat on a stormy sea. The youth also urged his camel forward, and as the hours passed they moved with a rapid pace over the sand dunes into the heart of that desert whence no man has ever returned alive. Suddenly the figure on the great black dromedary raised his hand, and the intelligent creature stopped as if it had read its master's thoughts. The youth drew up alongside, and, halting, peered out into the haze of the desert. He saw forming out of the mist a strange city of marble and sandstone. Great obelisks, carved with figures of birds and beasts, rose from amid garden groves of ancient palms, whose branches swayed as though by a gentle wind. Mighty pylons, surmounted by figures of sun globes with spreading wings, appeared. Slowly the sand changed into a sparkling lake with fantastic boats, in the form of birds floating upon it. The papyrus, with its bushy heads, grew from the marshes on the shores, and crimson-breasted herons stood like statues in the shallow places. Before the travelers stretched a great avenue of sphinxes with the water lapping the bases of their pedestals, and in the distance rose the plumed pillars of an immense temple, such as that whose ruin still stands like a gaunt skeleton at Karnak. Fleecy white clouds seemed to float in the ethers, and a scene of magic beauty took the place of the sandhills of the desert. From the gates of the ancient city, over the bridges across the water, great caravans were passing. Splendidly robed figures on Arabian stallions dashed in and out. Heavily laden donkeys and oxen plodded beneath ponderous loads. Streams of camels, gorgeously caparisoned, moved to and from the hills. Now and then a huge elephant, bearing on its back a gilded houdah, lumbered by, its tusks inlaid with gold, and its smooth body painted in colored pigments. Once a chariot dashed through the street, with cruel curved sword blades upon its wheels, to cut and destroy all who sought to stay its progress. The young man gazed at the vision in amazement, for such a sight had not appeared in the world for thousands of years. "Is this all an illusion?" he gasped. "No," answered the guide, as he rested his arm on the long barrel of his gun. "This is part of the mystery of Akasha, in whose subtle essences live eternal all things that have ever been. This vast city of living light, this dream palace of the past, floats all over the surface of the earth in the ever-changing ethers of nature. These are the mirages of the desert, and as the eyes of men grow dim from gazing at the shining sand, and the life is slowly burned away by the blazing desert sun, these visions come to him, hovering on the horizons, and lure him on to drink of water which lips can never taste, to rest in shade which can never shelter the body. When you come near to this city, it sinks away, and though you follow it to the ends of the earth, you could never reach it. But come, I have been appointed out of this city to show you things which you have wandered far to see. I am a mirage like the rest, for I belong to a race that is no more. You see me with the eyes of a dying man. You see me with the senses of the shadow. But let us pass over yonder bridge and into a citadel that was a ruin 5,000 years before the coming of your Christ." They urged forward their animals, and crossing an arched bridge, entered the city of the mirage. They were in the same sort of bustling town which dots the Orient today.
tiny shops and narrow streets, laughing people and busy tradesmen. The grim mystery lay in the fact that all these things were shadows, unreal and non-existent. Those who sold wares or bartered for merchandise had left their labors ages before. But still in the ethers they bought and sold, gave and exchanged the wondrous rugs of Baghdad, the steel blades of Damascus, and the hand-illuminated papyrus scrolls of the Nile. The makers of perfume dispensed their sweet-scented wares, and the gold and silversmiths hammered their metals. The priest in his pleated robes walked along the rutted streets deeply grooved by chariot wheels. All, however, was in the mist, in a world that can never be again. The mysterious guide led the youth through all these streets and byways, where yelping curs sought to stay their progress, where little swarthy children played among the rutted cobblestones, where flashing color and deepest filth mingled in true Oriental confusion. Then before them rose a temple, not with the domes and minarets of Stamboul or the fluted columns of Athens, but an imposing structure capped by a gigantic pyramid. Confronting the travelers arose massive gates of bronze. Upon the walls of the temple were carved grotesque figures, painted with pigments drawn from human blood, which last eternally because of their subtle, enduring qualities. Figures of gods and goddesses, winged globes and fiery demons, conceptions of the two-dimensional art of the craftsmen of ancient Egypt.
"What is this?"
asked the youth.
"This is the Temple of the Three Fires, the shrine of the thrice Magistar, Thoth Hermes Mercurius, the king of heaven, earth, and hell," answered the white-robed guide, while his camel knelt beside the steps. Slipping from the cushions, he waved his hand, and the beast disappeared as though it had never been. "Behold," he said, turning to the youth, "part of the mirage has already vanished. The rest will follow when it has accomplished its purpose." The brown-haired man descended from his camel, but somewhat awkwardly, and followed the figure that mounted the steps by the feet of the faithful. Drawing his scimitar, the Egyptian hammered with its hilt upon the bronze gates, which resounded as though they were bells of solid gold. Slowly they parted, and the youth watched the 10 Nubian slaves turning the mighty wheel, their clanking chains echoing in rhythm with the falling cogs. Beckoning the youth to enter, the older man followed him, and the gate closed behind them. The visitor found himself in the strangest room that he had ever seen, stranger far than any creation of his dreams, a great wall of feathered columns, each one carved with the face of a god. Far up near the ceiling burned 12 ethereal fires, which cast ghastly shadows, causing the stone eyes of the gods to blink as though alive. From the roof of the temple, tinted like the blue of the sky, hung suns, moons, and stars, and the planets of our chain, which seemed to twist and revolve like living things. Before them sat a mighty figure, upon its head a crown of crescents interlaced. Like a Memnon of the desert, it rose to an immense height, sitting upon a throne of Alexandrian marble. Upon its brow was the uraeus, and in one hand the book of the breaths of life, while in the other was the Croix Ansata, the promise of Egyptian immortality. Between its feet was a doorway leading into a mystic vault. Of living occupant there was no sign, but as the travelers stood there, a weird chant as of many voices broke the silence. "Glory, glory, glory, mighty Lord of the 7 lights! Glory, 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 Osiris, Prince Regent of the earth! O Child of the Hawk! Glory, 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 O Isis, Mother of Nature! Glory, 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 O Isis, Keeper of the Seals, Mother of Creation, Goddess of the Nile! Glory be to thee!" During this chant a dull glow lighted the mighty figure which was that of Isis, the mother goddess of the ancients. Around the statue dim forms kept circling like monster vampire bats, and the guide, turning to his companion, whispered, "These are the griffins and the demons who stand as watchful sentinels over the sacred things. You are in the temple of the Mother of Mysteries, Isis, the Virgin of Heaven. Come." They pressed forward together, and reaching the little door at the base of the image, they passed in through a veil of fine silk, which parted at their approach, and entered a spacious room shaped like a cube, bare of all furnishings, its smooth walls marked only by the joints of the stones. A door of granite closed behind them, and they were in a hollow cube of solid masonry.
The guide raised one copper-colored hand toward heaven and pointed with the other to the earth, as he said solemnly, "Behold, this is the measure of a man." The youth did not understand, but gazed around him in awe. "Where am I, O revered master?" he asked. "You are in the Holy of Holies, the secret chamber of the thrice Magister, the Lord of Light, and the threefold essence of the flame. Beneath your feet is a chamber, the depth of which no man may know. In that rock-hewn room is concealed the wisdom of the world. Far above your head rises a mighty pyramid, upon whose apex burns the fire eternal." He took 3 little objects from the folds of his robe and, tossing them upon the ground, said, "Behold, the keys of wisdom." The disciple looked and saw 3 tiny geometrical shapes of some precious stone shining at his feet. The first was a little green cube, the second a little red pyramid, the third a shining globe of translucent whiteness. "Behold the scepters of the king, and the key to the riddle of the universe," said the white-robed man, pointing to the little forms. "But now I will show you the greatest mystery of them all, the pact that was made of God to man, in which the spirit of Hermes Mercurius is tied forever to the soul of man. Behold!" As he spoke, he faced the western side of the temple. The great central stones broke away, and, sliding out upon runners of solid granite suspended in the air, left an opening about 10 feet square. In this great opening hung a stone of the most clear and brilliant green. It gleamed, glowed, and glistened until it was surrounded by an aureole of flames that seemed to light the darkest corners of the recess. It was suspended from the top of the aperture by golden chains and was surrounded by a massive setting of gold. The magnificent jewel was rectangular, and upon it, in letters of fire, were traced many rows of strange characters in a language long forgotten. "And what is this?" whispered the young Greek, bowing in awe before the stone. "This sacred object that you look upon," answered his guide as the room grew green with the light, "is the tabula smaragdina, the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, the oldest relic in the world, and God's first revelation to man." "What do those strange letters say?" asked the student eagerly. "Read," answered the master, pointing up to the stone. As the youth gazed, he seemed to remember something. Somewhere, sometime, he had known that language. Slowly it became clear to him. The flaming hieroglyphics etched themselves into his very soul. "Behold, the secret work of Hermes thrice Magister, 1 in essence, but 3 in aspect. The work of Chiron Mercurius, the universal agent and nameless power, 1 in spirit, but 3 in expression. This is true. This is no lie. This is certain and to be depended upon. The superior above agrees with the inferior below, and the inferior below agrees with the superior above. Know this to effect the one true and perfect work. As all things owe their existence to the will of one thing, so all things have their origin out of one thing. The father of that thing is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carrieth it in its wings, and its nurse is the spiritual earth. Only one thing after God is the father of all things of this universe and those to come. Its power is perfect, and to everlasting end after it is one with the spiritual earth. But you must separate the spiritual earth from the dense or crude dirt by means of this gentle flame with great attention. Then it ascends from the earth up into heaven, and descends again newborn as dew upon the earth. And the superior and the inferior are increased to greater power by the dew of life. By this thou wilt partake of the honors of the whole world, and darkness and ignorance shall fly from thee. This is the strength of all power. With this art thou the master of all things, with power to transmute all that is fine, such as gold, and all that is coarse, such as metals. In this manner the world was created. The arrangements to follow this road are hidden. For this reason, I am called Chiron Mercurius, Telat Makasot, 1 in spirit, but 3-fold in manifestation. In my trinity is hidden the wisdom of the whole world. I have spoken, and it is ended now, that which I have said concerning the effect of the sun. Thus endeth the tabula smaragdina of Hermes thrice Magistar. The lights gleamed and glowed upon the emerald, and the youth stood transfixed with awe and admiration. Suddenly the silence was broken by a crash of thunder, and a shadowy form hovered in the alcove. It wore the head of an ibis, the sacred bird of Hermes, and in its hand it carried a tablet and a style. For a moment it stood like a phantom with the emerald for a heart. The room swayed and twisted and turned, the mighty rocks groaned and splintered, and darkness enveloped the entire scene. The youth staggered and reeled. A voice sounded low in his ear, the voice of his guide.
"The city of the mirage is vanishing in the desert air. I cannot come with you, for I am part of the great illusion. But you have seen. Forget not what you have beheld." A mighty roar filled the air, and the youth felt himself falling. End of section 10.
Section 11 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your God and my God. It was one of those little east side streets where the rays of the sun seldom strike, where battered stone fronts and dilapidated bricks overhang streets, narrow and gloomy, and many ragged little children play on the curbstones or sail paper boats in the gutters. The bustle and confusion which marks the lower side of the life of a great city filled the air. Here and there, an old brick tenement rose gloomily from the surrounding shacks, and the alleys were crossed and crisscrossed with clotheslines, upon which strange-colored garments fluttered in the air. The day had been cloudy, and the clothes had not dried well. Their limp and bedraggled appearance was characteristic of everything in sight, including the people who slouched along the streets. The only joy seemed to be the laughter of the children, and they laughed because they did not realize the sordidness of their surroundings. It was a place of sunken cheeks, hollowed eyes, and furrowed brows, a district where despair dwells and where need is ever howling at the door. In this sordid neighborhood, jammed in between a gloomy tenement and a sweatshop where a toiling humanity sold youth and life for the price of bread, stood a little one-story shack, broken in front and battered by age. Everyone knew this building, the little Buddhist church which had found its way into a land of many flags to minister to the needs of the children of India and Japan. It did not appear like an American church, for it had no spires or belfry. It was a stranger in a strange land, and the Lord of the Lotus meant little to those hungry ones who would gladly sell their souls for a crust of bread. From across the blue Pacific and over many miles of steel rails, there had come one from the East, bringing with him the faith of the East and the childish simplicity of the East, that indescribable something which fascinates the traveler who wanders in Oriental countries. A few lonely ones in this great city had called him from the bright sunshine and green-clad mountains of India, had called him to minister to their needs. He had come out of his temple with its chanting priests, wreaths of purple incense, and majesty sublime, and as the least of the disciples of a lowly one, came to bring the light of Asia to his people in America. A quaint character was the little Buddhist priest. In spite of his strange gods, many of the people in that little tenement world had learned to welcome his smile and his quaint broken English. He had big black eyes and a kindly face, and though the years weighed upon him, his countenance conveyed an impression of childlike simplicity. There was no guile in his look, no deceit in his smile, no airs about his manner, but there was something infinitely human, deeply touching, even pathetic, in his brave battle against religions which opposed him. The Buddhists loved him and came from miles around to his little church in the gloom of the tenement walls. They would go into the door in reverence, but once through the portal they lived in another world, for strange oriental hangings covered the walls, and the subtle odor of burning sandalwood and musk imparted an oriental atmosphere to the whole. There in a little niche upon which loving hands had traced the flowers of Buddha was a little shrine in which sat their Lord and God, their minister of light, their consoler in sorrow, their hope of redemption, their voice before the Almighty, Lord Gautama, the great Buddha. Here they came and brought their offerings, here they came to pray and sing their mantrams. Here they came in sorrow and in joy, young and old. Here, far from the gods of their birth, they found solace. One day, when the little Buddhist priest was out on the street, he saw a child playing in the gutter with a little form of crockery or marble. He leaned over, and there, gazing up at him from the mud, was a sad, pathetic face, carved and painted in some cheap but effective substance. The Buddhist priest gazed upon it for some minutes, then, as the child ran away, leaned over and picked it from the slime. Something within his soul seemed to stir, for in that face was a haunting look that drew him irresistibly. He gazed upon it for several moments. It was just a little face broken off at the neck, that of a man with long brown hair hanging in ringlets, now grayed with the mire. Upon the head of the figure rested a wreath of thorns, and thin streams of blood were trickling down the agonized countenance, imparting to it a strange, pathetic look, which struck right into the heart of the priest. Holding the broken face in his hands, the priest of another god walked down the street and stopped at the door of a house wherein dwelt Mrs. O'Flaherty, a kind-hearted old Irishwoman who had always smiled at him each morning as he went by. Mrs. O'Flaherty often said to her better half, "Faith and begorra, that little haythin is one of the sweetest infidels I ever met. It's me myself that's sorry he dinna believe in our God, for I'd like to see him go to heaven." Mrs. O'Flaherty was on the front step waiting for the huckster when the little Buddhist came by. Taking off his hat politely, he held out the little image and asked the broad, smiling Irishwoman who and what it was. Mrs. O'Flaherty looked for a second, and then crossed herself with reverence. "Faith, good sir, but that's the son of the Blessed Virgin herself." "Is that the one whom you call Jesus?" asked the Buddhist. "Sure, that it is." "It is a beautiful face," answered the priest, gazing in rapture at the little form. "He was a great man. Far off in my land we have heard of him, and they say he knew our Buddha, and that he still wanders over the mountains, hand in hand with him." "Faith, and I know nothing of that, but I don't think he's hanging around with any heathen," answered Mrs. O'Flaherty, leaning on her broomstick and wiping her face on the edge of her gingham apron. "Sure, and if it gets much hotter, I'm going to move up on the roof again, like I did last July." "Will you tell me about your master?" asked the Buddhist priest, still holding the little image in his hand. "I would know of him, for my soul tells me he too was a mighty Buddha." "Sure. Sit down right here on the step, and I'll tell yez about him till the Dago comes with me potatoes. Then Mikey's coming home from the dump yard, and I'll have to be getting him some dinner." Motherly old Mrs. Flaherty cast anchor and plunked herself down on the upper step, while the little Buddhist sat on the step below, still gazing at the little broken image. Then Mrs. O'Flaherty, in her homely way, gave her story of the master's life. The potatoes never came, and for 2 hours they talked there. A great light came into the eyes of the Buddhist priest, and something touched Mrs. O'Flaherty also, for the childlike peace and simplicity of the Hindu stirred her very soul. At last Mrs. O'Flaherty had to go, and the little Buddhist, clasping the broken face to his heart, crept quietly down the street, shaded by the falling night, to his little hole in the tenement wall where his people came to pray. One night in December, as I was passing by the little Buddhist church, I stopped for a moment in amazement. A door was hanging by one hinge, and its panels had been broken in with an axe. The windows were shattered, and the broken sashes were hanging dismally in the evening air. There was a thin flurry of snow that day. The sidewalks were slippery, and the hurrying passers-by did not stop to look in at the windows. All seemed dark inside, and I wondered what had happened to the little Buddhist church. As I stood undecided whether to go on or to push aside the broken door and enter, a sound broke the silence. It was a broken sob, just one heartbreaking wail, so low as scarcely to be heard, but which seemed to strike the very heartstrings. Quickly pushing aside the broken door, I entered the little church. Everything inside was in disorder. The drapings, placed with so much love, were torn away. The little flimsy altar with the lotus blossoms traced upon it had been kicked to pieces. The little shrine was overturned, and on the floor in front of it lay the shattered body of Lord Buddha, his gilded form crushed in by the blow of an axe. One little lone taper was burning and cast its feeble rays over the scene of dissolution. On the floor at the foot of the broken shrine, and the shattered bits of the gilded statue, lay the Buddhist priest. From a wound upon his forehead, blood dropped upon the broken statue. "What is the matter?" I cried, How did this happen?" And kneeling down, I raised the limp body of the priest. He looked at me for a moment, and then the tears broke out afresh. In the Western world, men do not cry, but in the Eastern world it is different. I knew that it was not pain that brought the tears, but an ache in the soul. "Tell me what has happened," I asked in sympathy. And in broken bits I got the story, a story that is often told in the Western world, though mayhaps not in just the same words. "Oh, how hard I have tried to carry into your beautiful land the light of our God. He is a God of love and light. If you could only learn of my God, you would not slay your brothers. Had you the love of my God, this wrecked shrine would not lie here today. I came from far-off India, a stranger in a strange land, to bring the blessing of my priest, who sent me out to minister unto my people here in this land where people think only of themselves. This was my little shrine, where I used to come at night, and here I have ever found love and light in the gaze of my Buddha. In the stillness I could hear his soft voice whispering courage to me in my labors. I have never injured anyone, nor have I ever sought to lead your people from their gods. I have just come to keep my own. Far across the sea they told me that this was a free land, where people could believe in whom they would, and pray unto whatsoever God they would. I came, and for 5 years I have labored among my people here. I have tried to serve them in love and patience. Last night, when all was still, I came and knelt before my Buddha, before your God and my God. And as I sat here dreaming of the days when my Lord walked on earth, and of the time when his blessing should be upon me, a harsh voice suddenly broke my meditation. "Open the door," it said. I rose and opened the door, and several white men stood there. One said to me, "Get out of the way, you dirty heathen." Another said, "We will have no more devil worshippers in our district." A third said, "To hell with those who worship wood and stone." Then they came into my beautiful temple, and broke the furniture, tore down the drapings, and one of them took a great axe and aimed a blow at my poor Buddha, my Buddha whom I brought with me from the caves of Gunga, far up in the snow. My Buddha was made when the great Lord himself walked the earth, and for over 2,000 years has inspired and guided my people. I could not stand it. I rushed between my Buddha and the blow. Then all grew black. How long I have been here I do not know, but it must have been many hours. When I came to, this is what I saw. Is this what your God has taught you? Is this the one to whom you pray that he should kill the faith of other men? It is nearly done with me. I cannot battle with your world. Already I can see my home. I can see it in these wrecked walls, the snow-capped peaks of my mountains. For many years I have served my God in spirit and in truth, and now I am going to him. I am going into Nirvana, into the home of Buddha. But before I go, say unto the world that I will go to my Buddha, and I will pray to him for those who have broken his shrine. I will pray unto my God for his love and his compassion." The heartbroken little priest raised himself for a moment, and his hands closed over the broken statue of his Buddha. He turned the body around, and there in the back was a hollow, such as is often found in Eastern gods, wherein they put their treasured trinkets or their books of mantrams. The blow of the axe had fallen deeply and had cut the body of the god in two, and as he held it, there fell from the broken opening 2 pieces of crockery. Picking them up and joining them together, I found that they formed the face of Jesus. "How came they here?" I asked softly. The Buddhist answered softly, "Many months ago, I found that little face in the street where children were playing with it in the gutter. Its sad look made me sad, and I brought it home and put it in the heart of my Buddha, that the heart of my God might make your God glad." He looked down on the pieces. "Look," he whispered, "the blow that broke my Buddha's heart broke your God's face. Is it not so, my friend? Is not your God glad with my God? Is he not sad with my God?" The Buddhist picked up the broken bits of plaster. "Look, they have shattered his face. In striking at my God, they have broken their own. And I loved his face, it was so sad. But it can be no sadder than
is his heart this day. I can see a face beside me. It is—"
And the little Buddhist held up his hands.
"Oh, Master, with the wreath of thorns, I see you. You have come to me. God of another people, I loved you, but those who slew me have slain you. Look, I see the mountain in the sky. Om Mani Padma Hum. Lord Buddha, I come."
The form grew limp, and the tragedy was ended. A broken god and 2 little bits of plaster lay on the floor. End of section 11. Section 12 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cave of the Apes.
I must warn you, my dear Dr. Applegate, that you are becoming a little too fanatical in your viewpoints. I respect your great sincerity and your desire to convert my people to your religion, but at the present time you are making many enemies, and if you do not restrain your ardor, I actually fear for your life."
The speaker, a Hindu gentleman, leaned back in his reed chair, and putting the tips of his fingers together, gazed at them reflectively.
"You know, my race is exceedingly ancient. For thousands of years my people have had their religion, which to them means more than life itself. We Hindus believe in our gods. We serve our light as we understand it. And, while possibly differing from you, we do not feel that you have the right to demand of us, against our will, that we should change a faith which solves completely and intelligently the problems of our lives."
The Reverend Dr. Applegate glared back at the speaker, but with a tremendous effort restrained his ire. He was a missionary, but to him the idea of converting heathen had become an obsession. He lived only to convert. He looked down upon and despised the faiths of the people with whom he worked. He spent much of his time criticizing, condemning, and tearing down the ancient doctrines of India. In vain his friends had urged him to be more tactful. Applegate would not listen. The evening before he had entered the temple of a nearby village, and had torn the idols from their shrines and chopped them into kindling wood. The natives had risen in a body, and Applegate was forced to flee through several miles of jungle and to swim a river in order to reach a place of safety. It was as a result of this escapade that the learned Hindu gentleman had called at the Reverend Doctor's mission and advised him to be less outspoken in his views concerning Oriental theology. The dignified Brahmin continued.
"Many of your countrymen have come to India, and in the name of Christianity have sought diligently to educate and improve the conditions of my people. For this assistance we are not ungrateful. When your missionaries come in a spirit of kindliness and helpfulness, we seek to cooperate in every way possible. Nevertheless, we have a right to our faiths. If we sought to force you to accept our doctrines, you would drive us from your country. And if you are unkind, and I may almost say unchristian, in your method of gaining converts, you can expect no better treatment. It is quite useless for you to believe that you can tear down all our altars and force our worshippers to follow your gods. So I warn you again, my dear sir, that unless you show greater civility, kindness, and forbearance in your religious work, I am very much afraid that you will meet an untimely end."
"I shall never rest until I've torn down every heathen shrine in India," retorted Applegate, bringing his fist down on the cane table between them with sufficient violence to cause their lemonade glasses to rattle. "If these heathens will not come to the true faith of their own accord, I shall cram it down their throats, sir, and no fear of danger will divert me from my purpose. It is well that you came this morning, for this afternoon I should not have been here. I am leaving this noon for the hills. A number of holy men are journeying to the temple of Hanuman, the Ape King, to make offerings. Well, sir, I am carrying a .45 caliber revolver. Do you know what I am going to do? I'm going to shoot every sacred ape in that place, and no one had better try to stop me." There was no questioning the fact that Dr. Applegate's 35 years in the Far East had unbalanced him. The Oriental, as he gazed into the flushed countenance of the excited missionary, realized that he was dealing with a madman, but he replied in the same soft voice and carefully chosen words.
"I know the place where you are going, and once more I offer my advice. although I fear it is quite useless to do so. The monkey temple of which you speak is under the protection of a great and wise pundit, a learned and philosophic man, beloved by the natives. If you go on such an errand as you describe, you probably will never return. One thing more, do not shoot the sacred monkeys. To do so is to murder. You do not understand the Orient, my dear sir, and your 30-odd years' stay seems to have profited you little. There are many weird tales of that temple, tales of magic and mystery. You do not understand the sorcery and necromancy of my people. Stay away, lest terrible ill befall you. The Temple of the Apes is famous from one end of India to the other. It was excavated in memory of Hanuman, the king of the monkeys, who assisted the hero of our religious myths, Rama, to find his beloved Sita when she had been stolen away by the wicked Ravan, king of Lanka.
"You have said rightly that the temple is notorious all over India," shouted Applegate, rising to his feet. "And that, sir, is why I am going there. Before I get through, I will completely demolish that temple, even if I have to do so with my bare hands. I am not afraid of your pundits, your philosophers, or your wise men. I am the servant of the one and only true God, and I will overthrow your false philosophies and save the souls of your people, though I die in the labor." The tall, slender Oriental bowed his head in assent, and rising, prepared to depart.
"If Sahib Applegate follows the program he has outlined to me," he muttered under his breath, "he will die all right. There is no doubt on that subject."
After a few words of farewell, the tall Hindu departed, leaving the Reverend Doctor pacing back and forth on his veranda, launching into the atmosphere streams of imprecations aimed at heathens in general. The Temple of the Apes was hewn out of the solid rock at the base of a great cliff. It was in reality a series of caverns, one behind the other, the walls of which were gloriously carved with scenes from the Ramayana and other Hindu classics. Pillars carved from the living rock supported the roof. A number of statues of Shiva were prominent among the sculpturings. Many little cell-like caverns led off from the main chambers. In these dwelt a few ascetics, harming no one, living the simple recluse existence which in India constitutes the religious life. Here and there were monkeys, sitting on protruding bas-reliefs or shrines, playing around the floor, or hanging by their tails from the carvings on the ceilings. Their little beady eyes gave these simians a sagacious look. The priests guarded and cared for them in honor of the service which the monkeys had rendered their religious hero ages before. The little area before the temple was usually deserted, but now it was densely crowded with holy men, some of whom had come from a great distance. A strange and heterogeneous group they were, wild and disheveled in appearance, with long matted hair and unkempt beards, some scantily clothed, others naked, some walking, some being carried, and a few riding in carts drawn by white Indian bulls. These were the great ones, the living saints, the holy men, and if we are to believe the strange stories told concerning them, great spiritual power was concealed in this nondescript mass. Some few were eating, others were squatted on the ground praying, some even were lying asleep. Suddenly the silence was broken by loud talking in English, and the Right Reverend Obadiah Applegate, D.D., appeared upon the scene. He had been running, consequently was all out of breath, and his words were punctuated with pants. His white linen suit was plentifully covered with oriental dust, which rises in clouds from every native road, and his toupee was out of place. Around his waist, under his white coat, was strapped a revolver, while from one pocket protruded the gilt edge of a prayer book. Applegate was about to convert the Gentile Hindus at whatever cost. A few of the holy men looked up in mild surprise at the frenzied figure, but most did not deign to break their concentration by turning their eyes in his direction. As he neared the steps cut in the stone, an aged and bent ascetic appeared from within the temple, and stretching out his arms, barred his progress.
"You cannot come in here,"
protested the Oriental in Hindustani.
"This place is for the faithful and the believers alone."
Applegate understood the language and answered in the same tongue. "I come in the name of the true God, to tear down your false idols, and to save your souls from eternal damnation." The Hindu's face became stern.
"Who is the true God?"
he demanded.
And what right have you to speak for him? You, who come into a temple, armed as though for battle, to interrupt the meditations of the holy. Get you gone, and leave righteous men to their prayers."
While Applegate was no longer young, his religious frenzy gave him strength. Ascending the steps, he pushed the old Hindu out of his way and entered the gloomy cavern which formed the sanctuary. His eyes fell upon a sleek brown monkey, hanging by its tail, and 1 foot from the outstretched arm of Brahma, who stood twice life-size carved from the rock of the mountain. With a cry of triumph, Applegate drew his revolver, and its report echoed hollowly through the cavern. With a little chattering cry, the monkey released its grip, and falling to the floor of the cave, struggled for a second, and then lay still. Immediately a howl arose from the gathered holy men. In an angry mob, they surged toward the missionary. That worthy, absolutely crazed with his ideal, began firing in every direction. Sometimes he hit, but more often he missed the scampering monkeys, who ran chattering and crying into distant corners. The great crowd of enraged mendicants gathered closer. A moment later they closed in upon Applegate. The revolver was wrenched from his hand, and he was tied hand and foot with strips of cloth, and stood up against the rear wall of the temple. The priest whom he had attacked and thrown to one side separated himself from the throng, and advancing to within a few feet of the missionary, addressed him in Hindustani again.
"Why have you come to kill our sacred monkeys, and to destroy our temple? We have never bothered your mission, or interfered with your right to worship whatever gods you saw fit. We have gathered alone here in the woods, where we bother no one, and here we pray to our Father, as you pray to yours. Yet you come, and, in the name of a supposedly good and merciful God, attempt to destroy the faith of other men, to tear down their shrines, and to slay their sacred animals. You have much to learn, and you shall have an opportunity to learn it, for you shall stay in this temple all the rest of your life, and here you shall die. You are not the first who has come here to injure and destroy us, nor shall you be the first to leave. You must stay."
"You can't keep me," replied Applegate furiously. "I am a man of the cloth. The British government will force you to give me up. It knows where I went. It will come to search for me, and then it will severely punish all of you who have tried to injure me."
The aged Hindu smiled.
"Never shall they find you, yet you will be here. Never shall they punish us, for they will not know who or what you are. Year after year, the English may come and walk by you, but they shall not rescue you. You have sinned against our gods, and our gods are strong. We have called for the vengeance of our gods, and our gods have heard."
The holy man held his 2 hands forward, so that the palms faced the Reverend Dr. Applegate. From each hand poured a thin stream of blue light, which, striking the missionary, blinded him. He felt his back being turned downward by an unknown power. He screamed and twisted and struggled. Everything grew black around him, and, with a last wailing cry, he pitched forward on the ground. A search party was sent out the next morning under the direction of a young British Army sergeant. Hearing that the missionary had gone to the Temple of the Apes, the party decided to begin their quest for Applegate there. Reaching the overhanging ledge of rock under which the cave had been excavated, the young sergeant went up to the holy man who stood by the entrance. "Have you seen anything of the Reverend Dr. Applegate?" he asked the immobile-faced native.
"Yes, Sahib. He was here last night."
"Where is he now?" demanded the sergeant. Before replying, the holy man paused a moment, stroking a little gray monkey which sat on his shoulder.
"Only the gods can answer, but you may search for him."
Finding that further questioning was useless, the search party went through the caverns from end to end. At last, after a fruitless quest, they departed. As they vanished down the winding, dusty road, the old Hindu sage stood between the pillars carved from rock, and reaching up his hand to the little monkey that sat on his shoulder, he held up a piece of fruit.
"Maybe the Reverend Dr. Applegate would like a piece of banana,"
he murmured sarcastically, stroking the monkey's head. End of section 12. And end of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. Read by Ben Tucker.